Close your eyes for a moment and picture the most awe-inspiring ancient temple you can think of. Maybe it's the towering columns of Karnak or the intricate carvings of Angkor Wat. For centuries, we've been taught that these were places of human prayer, monuments to gods we can no longer name. But what if that's only half the story? What if these structures had another, far more mysterious purpose, one hidden in plain sight? There is a profound secret etched into the very stones of these sacred sites, a truth that transforms them from silent ruins into something alive with intention. These places were not just built for us, they were designed as permanent homes, meticulously engineered dwellings for powerful, mythical guardians. This is the secret architecture of sacred beasts, a lost language of spiritual engineering that connected humanity directly to the divine. This journey takes us beyond the guidebooks and into the minds of the ancient master builders, the architect priests who saw the world as a conversation between the earth and the heavens. They understood that certain locations pulsed with an energy that needed protection, and they conceptualized beings part animal, part god, to serve as eternal sentinels. From the lion-bodied Sphinx guarding the Giza Plateau to the multi-headed Nagas coiled along the bridges of Cambodian temples, these guardians were not arbitrary decorations. They were the conscious heart of a complex system, a system built on principles we are only beginning to rediscover. These architects used more than simple tools. They wielded sacred geometry, believing that specific proportions and shapes could attract and contain spiritual power. They aligned their temples with the sun, the moon, and the stars, turning entire complexes into stone calendars that pulsed with celestial rhythms. Every choice, from the specific type of granite quarried from a sacred mountain to the precise angle of a doorway, was a deliberate act in a grand cosmic design. To understand this is to unlock a completely new way of seeing our shared history. It's the difference between looking at a blueprint and feeling the presence of the family that will live in the house. These temples were active, breathing spaces where the boundary between myth and reality blurred. By decoding their blueprints, we don't just learn about ancient religions, we grasp something fundamental about humanity's ancient relationship with the cosmos, our deep-seated need to build bridges to the invisible world. This investigation will take us across continents and millennia, from the sun-baked deserts of Egypt to the rainforests of Mesoamerica, piecing together a puzzle that has been waiting patiently in stone and story. So prepare to see these world wonders in a completely new light, as we begin our search for the guardians of stone and myth. This instinct to seek protection in a mysterious world is perhaps one of the most deeply rooted human impulses. Long before the first stone temples rose towards the heavens, our ancestors looked out at the landscape and saw not just resources but spirit. They recognized that power was not distributed evenly. A spring that provided life-giving water in the middle of a desert, a mountain peak that touched the storm clouds, a cave that descended into absolute darkness. These were places of concentrated energy, nodes in the Earth's own nervous system. But with great power came great vulnerability. These portals, these wellsprings of life and connection, needed to be shielded from chaos, from neglect, from whatever unseen malevolent forces might seek to disrupt their delicate balance. And so, the concept of the guardian was born not as a vague superstition, but as a necessary component of a living, conscious universe. To manage these powerful forces, ancient cultures did something remarkable. They gave them a face. They personified the abstract idea of protection into tangible, relatable forms. This wasn't merely about creating art, it was about creating an interface. It's far easier for a community to pour offerings, sing hymns, and direct prayers to a being with a name and a form than to an invisible, abstract energy. The guardian became a point of contact, a designated representative of the sacred site's power. Think of it like the receptionist in a vast corporate building. You don't need to know the entire corporate structure. You just need to interact with the person at the front desk who directs the energy and manages the flow. The guardian served that role for the divine, a spiritual intermediary that made the immense power of a place approachable and manageable for human beings. The forms these guardians took were never random. They were carefully crafted symbolic cocktails, blending the most potent attributes of the local animal kingdom with divine characteristics. Consider the Greek griffin, a majestic fusion of the lion, the king of the land beasts, and the eagle, the king of the birds. This wasn't just a cool monster, it was a statement of ultimate authority and vigilance. The lion's strength offered terrestrial protection, while the eagle's supreme vision and connection to the skies provided a celestial overview, a watchfulness against threats from any direction. Similarly, in ancient Egypt, the god Anubis, with the head of a jackal, was the guardian of the necropolis. Jackals were frequently seen on the edges of the desert where tombs were built, and so this animal, familiar yet otherworldly, was chosen to embody the protective role over the threshold between life and death. The creature's very biology dictated its spiritual job description. This symbolic language allowed for incredibly nuanced spiritual ecosystems. A temple complex might have multiple guardians, each with a specialized role. A massive bull-like creature, such as the Lamassu of Mesopotamia, might guard the main gate, its sheer physical presence embodying impenetrable strength. Meanwhile, a more agile creature like a serpent or a dragon, associated with wisdom and the underworld, might be positioned near a sacred spring or crypt, protecting the flow of hidden knowledge or ancestral spirits. The choice was a direct reflection of the perceived need. A site associated with healing and water might be guarded by a being linked to cleansing and renewal, while a fortress temple might be protected by a creature of pure, intimidating power. The architecture that would eventually house these beings was therefore the final and most permanent step in this process of conceptualization, a process that began by listening to the whispers of the land itself and giving those whispers a form that could stand watch for eternity. Once the ancient builders had conceptualized their guardian, the very first physical decision they made was arguably the most profound. What would its body be made of? This was not a simple choice based on what was nearby or easiest to quarry. It was a deep conversation with the earth itself, a search for a material whose inherent spirit matched the divine purpose of the temple. They believed that stone was not inert, it was alive with a slow, deep vibration, a memory of the immense pressures and cosmic events that formed it. Selecting the right stone was like choosing the right wood for a musical instrument. Each type would resonate differently, producing a unique harmonic that would either attract or repel the spiritual energy they sought to invite. This was the sacred language of geology, and every culture learned to speak its distinct dialect. Take the Egyptians, for instance. When they built monuments intended to last for eternity, like the massive statues guarding tombs and temples, they consistently turned to granite. Quarried from places like Aswan, this stone is incredibly hard, resistant to erosion, and possesses a granular, crystalline structure that seems to capture and hold light. But to the Egyptian mind, these physical properties had a direct spiritual correspondence. Granite's durability made it the perfect vessel for a guardian's ka, or spirit essence, ensuring it would not fade or decay with the passing centuries. Furthermore, its predominant red and black hues connected it to the fertile black soil of the Nile and the blood of life, but also to the underworld, the domain of Osiris. A guardian carved from granite was therefore an eternal sentinel, rooted in the very cycle of death and rebirth, its spirit locked permanently into the fabric of the stone. Travel to ancient Greece and you find a completely different aesthetic and spiritual preference. Their majestic temples, dedicated to the Olympian gods who resided in the bright heavens, were overwhelmingly built from gleaming white marble or light-colored limestone. Where granite is earthly and enduring, marble was seen as celestial and reflective. It was a stone that captured the brilliance of the sun, seeming to amplify its light rather than simply absorb it. This quality was essential for temples designed to house benevolent, sky-dwelling deities. The goal was not to create a somber, underworld guardian, but to attract a luminous, heavenly presence. The pure, light-reflecting surface of the stone was believed to ward off shadows and chaotic spirits, creating a pristine, elevated space that was a true reflection of Mount Olympus on Earth. The material itself was part of the invocation, a beacon calling down the divine. This principle of matching the stone's origin to its spiritual function is perhaps most vividly illustrated in Mesoamerica. The great city of Teotihuacan, the City of the Gods, was constructed largely from a local volcanic rock. For the people of that region, volcanoes were not just geological features. They were living gods, sources of both destructive fire and life-giving fertile soil. The rock produced by volcanoes was therefore considered the solidified blood of the gods, charged with an immense, raw, primordial power. By building the pyramids of the sun and moon from this material, the architects were not merely using a convenient resource, they were constructing with the very substance of divinity. The temple itself became an extension of the sacred mountain, its guardian spirits infused with the same untamed energy that could both create and destroy worlds. The sourcing of these materials was itself a ritual act. Quarries were not just construction sites, they were often considered sacred grounds, the birthplace of the god's future home. The specific location mattered immensely. Stones for a particular temple might be hauled from a quarry many miles away, not because there was no local stone, but because that particular quarry was believed to hold a specific energy. A stone from a mountain peak might be chosen for a solar temple to capture that elevated, sky-touching essence. A stone from a riverbed smoothed by water might be selected for a temple dedicated to a water deity. The builders weren't just moving rock, they were transporting the soul of a place, bringing a piece of a distant sacred landscape to energize the new foundation. Even within a single block, the natural markings were read as signs. A vein of quartz running through granite might be interpreted as a lightning bolt from the gods, a pathway for celestial energy to flow into the statue. Unusual fossil inclusions could be seen as messages from a primordial age, blessing the stone with ancient wisdom. The color variations were not flaws but unique signatures, each block telling its own story before a single tool ever touched it. This profound respect for the material meant that the act of carving was not one of domination, but of revelation. The sculptor's job was to uncover the form of the guardian that was already sleeping within the stone, to listen to its natural contours and release the spirit waiting inside. This careful, intentional selection process transformed cold, dead rock into a living, resonant body, a suitable home for a being of myth. But a body is just a shell without a skeleton, and that's where the invisible blueprints of sacred geometry came into play. But a body of stone, however carefully chosen, is just a potential. It needs a structure, a soul, a set of instructions written not in words but in form. This is where the ancient architects moved from the language of the earth to the language of the cosmos itself, employing what we now call sacred geometry. Imagine these master builders standing over a blank slate of land, their first tool not a chisel or a hammer, but a compass and a straight edge. They weren't just measuring feet and inches, they were drawing the very blueprints of creation, believing that the same geometric principles that ordered the planets and the growth of shells could be used to construct a vessel for divine power. This wasn't mere decoration or advanced mathematics for its own sake. It was a spiritual technology, a method for tuning a building to the fundamental frequency of the universe, creating a harmonic resonance that would be irresistibly attractive to a guardian spirit. The foundation of this entire system rests on a few profound, universal shapes. The circle, with no beginning and no end, was universally seen as a symbol of unity, eternity, and the heavens the infinite, boundless realm of the divine. Its opposite, the square, with its 4 equal sides, represented the earth, material stability, and the 4 cardinal directions, the grounded, manifest world. The first and most crucial act of sacred architecture was to bring these 2 opposites together, to marry heaven and earth. This is brilliantly visualized in the ancient problem known as squaring the circle, a symbolic attempt to bring the infinite into a relationship with the finite. You see this principle embodied in structures like the mandala, a Hindu and Buddhist meditation diagram. A mandala is typically a square within a circle or a circle within a square, containing a complex concentric pattern. It isn't just a pretty picture, it's a map of the cosmos and the human psyche, a tool for focusing spiritual energy. When a temple's foundation was laid out according to this same principle, the entire structure became a 3-dimensional mandala, a machine for spiritual transformation. Perhaps the most famous of these cosmic proportions is the golden ratio, often represented by the Greek letter phi, approximately 1.618. This ratio appears with uncanny frequency in nature in the spiral of a nautilus shell, the arrangement of sunflower seeds, and the proportions of the human body. The ancients observed this pattern and concluded it was a signature of the divine, a mathematical key to beauty, balance, and life itself. They integrated it obsessively into their designs. The facade of the Parthenon in Athens is the classic example. The relationship between its width and height, the spacing of its columns, even the dimensions of its individual elements, all conform to the golden ratio. But why? The belief was that this specific proportion created a visual and energetic harmony, a frequency that was inherently pleasing and stable. Just as a perfectly tuned musical chord resonates beautifully, a building based on phi was thought to vibrate with a serenity and perfection that would naturally attract and soothe a benevolent guardian entity, making it feel at home. Another powerful, though less known, geometric symbol is the Vessica Piscis. This shape, whose name means bladder of a fish in Latin, is formed when 2 circles of the same radius overlap so that the center of each lies on the circumference of the other. The almond-shaped area where they intersect is rich with meaning. It was seen as a symbolic womb or a birth canal, a generative portal between worlds. In Christian art, it often frames figures of Christ, representing his emergence from the divine into the material world. In older traditions, this exact shape was used to define the most sacred parts of a temple, the doorway to the inner sanctum, the space around the altar, or the frame for a statue of a god. To pass through a doorway whose arch was based on the Vessica Piscis was to symbolically pass through a gateway of spiritual rebirth, leaving the profane world behind and entering a space charged with generative, divine energy. It was the architectural equivalent of an invitation, a geometrically precise welcome mat for the supernatural. It's crucial to understand that these patterns were not considered passive diagrams. They were seen as active, living circuits. The lines and shapes were believed to conduct spiritual energy, much like wires conduct electricity. The architects designed these geometric networks to focus and amplify power at specific points within the temple, often the spot where the guardian statue would reside. Think of a satellite dish, carefully curved to collect faint signals from space and concentrate them onto a single receiver. The sacred geometry of the temple acted in the same way, designed to gather the diffuse energy of the cosmos and focus it onto the guardian, empowering it and sustaining its presence. This turns the entire building from a simple shelter into a powerful battery, a resonant chamber for spiritual force. The precision of the geometry created a stable, potent foundation, a perfectly tuned instrument. But an instrument needs to be played. It was the alignment of this geometric blueprint with the grand movements of the heavens that would truly bring the temple to life. Having established a stable, geometrically perfect foundation, the ancient architects then performed their most audacious act. They reached into the sky and pulled the cosmos down to earth. A temple built with sacred proportions was a perfectly tuned instrument, but it remained silent until it was connected to the grand orchestra of the heavens. This connection was achieved through celestial alignment, the practice of orienting a structure with such precision that it became a dynamic participant in the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. The temple was transformed from a static monument into a living calendar, a stone clock that marked the most spiritually significant moments of the year with breathtaking drama. This wasn't just astronomy, it was a form of spiritual engineering designed to invite celestial guardians, beings of light and cosmic order, to take up residence within the walls. The most iconic example of this practice is, without a doubt, the Great Sphinx of Giza. For most of the year, this colossal guardian simply stares eastward across the desert. But on the spring equinox, something miraculous happens from the perspective of an ancient priest. As the sun rises, it appears directly over the Sphinx's shoulder, perfectly aligning with its gaze. The equinox is a moment of perfect balance when day and night are equal length, symbolizing renewal, creation, and the triumph of light. For the Egyptians, this was intimately tied to the solar deity Ra and the story of resurrection. By aligning the lion-bodied Sphinx with this event, the architects were making a profound statement. This guardian is not just a protector of the pharaoh's tomb, it is a participant in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, a terrestrial anchor for the sun's life-giving power. On that one morning each year, the Sphinx wasn't just a statue, it was a conduit, actively channeling the energy of renewal into the entire Giza plateau. This principle of solar infusion was taken to an even more sophisticated level at temples like Abu Simbel in Egypt. Here, Ramses II had his grand temple carved into a mountain, but with an ingenious feature. The inner sanctum, located deep within the rock, housed statues of himself and three major gods. For 364 days of the year, this chamber lay in deep shadow. But on two specific days, allegedly the pharaoh's birthday and his coronation day, the rising sun would slice through the long, narrow entrance corridor. A shaft of light would travel over 60 meters into the mountain's heart, finally illuminating the faces of the statues, with the exception of Ptah, the god of the underworld, who remained wisely in the shadows. This was the ultimate act of charging a guardian. The statues were not merely being lit up for a spectacle, they were being bathed in solar energy, their divine essence activated and renewed for the year to come. It was a scheduled maintenance of spiritual power, dictated by the unerring motion of the cosmos. This celestial choreography was a universal language, spoken with different accents across the world. In the Americas, at places like the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde, the architects aligned their structures with the solstices, the extreme points of the sun's journey. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, was often seen as a critical, dangerous moment when the sun was at its weakest, engaged in a mythological battle against the forces of darkness. A temple aligned to capture the first light of the winter solstice was designed to help the sun win that battle, to provide a foothold for light at its moment of greatest vulnerability. The beam of light striking a specific spiral petroglyph or illuminating a particular altar on that day was a sign of victory, a reassurance that the cosmic order was maintained. The temple, through its alignment, became an active ally in this eternal struggle. By mirroring the heavens so precisely, the temple achieved its ultimate purpose. It became a microcosm. It was a small-scale, perfect model of the universe itself, a place where the divine order of the cosmos was made manifest on Earth. Within its walls, the chaotic, unpredictable events of the human world were replaced by the perfect, predictable rhythm of the stars. This created a bubble of sacred time and space, a sanctuary of cosmic law. This principle directly influenced the guardian statues. A guardian placed in such a space wasn't just protecting a building, it was protecting a miniature universe. Its role expanded from a local sentry to a cosmic custodian, maintaining the harmony between the celestial blueprint above and its earthly reflection below. The temple's alignment gave the guardian its jurisdiction, connecting its protective power to the very mechanics of reality. And with this cosmic stage set, the next step was to position the guardians themselves within the temple's sacred geography, focusing on the thresholds where their power was most critically needed. With the celestial alignment setting the grand cosmic stage, the architects then turned their attention to the precise choreography of protection within the temple walls. The positioning of the sacred beasts was a sophisticated science of spiritual defense, honed over centuries to manage the flow of energy and intention. This strategy focused intensely on liminal zones, those potent, vulnerable thresholds between different states of being. A doorway isn't just a physical opening. It's a transition from outside to inside, from public to private, from the profane world to the sacred. Ancient builders understood that these points of crossing were where energies mixed and where spiritual boundaries were most permeable, and therefore they required the most formidable guardians. One of the most powerful examples of this principle are the colossal Lamassu figures of ancient Assyria. These awe-inspiring beings, with the body of a bull symbolizing immense strength, the wings of an eagle representing divine oversight, and the head of a wise, bearded king, were not placed randomly in the palace. They stood guard at the very gateways, their massive bulk framing the entrance. Anyone approaching ambassador, trader, or potential enemy would have to pass directly beneath their impassive gaze. Their hybrid form was a calculated display of power, designed to intimidate malevolent spirits and project the king's earthly and divine authority. But their function went beyond mere intimidation. They acted as spiritual filters, their very presence creating a barrier that negative energies could not cross, ensuring that only those with rightful purpose could enter the sanctified space beyond. This concept of the gateway as a spiritual filter is magnificently expressed in the Hindu temple architecture of southern India. The entrance to these temples is dominated by the Gopuram, an immense pyramidal tower gateway that is often the tallest part of the entire complex. But the Gopuram is far more than an impressive facade. It is a dense tapestry of stone, covered from base to summit in hundreds of intricate carvings of deities, demons, and mythical animals. To pass through this gateway is to undergo a visual and spiritual transformation. A devotee walking through is surrounded on all sides by the entire cosmology of their faith, a vivid reminder that they are leaving the mundane concerns of the everyday world behind. It is a deliberate, immersive process that forces a shift in consciousness, preparing the individual step by step for the encounter with the divine in the inner sanctum. In Egypt, the entrance to a major temple was marked by massive, sloping walls called pylons. Flanking the central doorway, these monumental gateways were themselves symbolic of the horizon, the Akhet, where the sun rose and set. And guarding this critical threshold between the world of the living and the domain of the gods were statues of powerful animal guardians. Lions, representing the fierce, protective power of the sun god, were a common choice, often arranged in long avenues. So too were jackals, intimately connected to Anubis, the guardian of the necropolis. Their presence at the temple gates reinforced the idea that crossing this boundary was as significant as the sun's daily journey across the sky, a cyclical passage from one state of existence to another, requiring divine protection. The strategic placement of guardians extended far beyond the main entrance, creating a layered defense system throughout the entire sacred complex. The corners of a building or a wall were considered spiritually weak points, areas where protective energy could leak away or where negative forces might gather. To fortify these vulnerabilities, smaller guardian figures or protective symbols were often embedded right into the architecture at these precise junctions. Furthermore, the processional pathways used during rituals and festivals were lined with statues. This wasn't just for decoration. These sentinels served as guides and protectors for the participants as they moved through the sacred landscape. They demarcated the holy route, ensuring that the ritual energy remained concentrated and the worshippers felt safe and directed on their spiritual journey. This careful, multi-layered placement transformed the temple from a simple building into a carefully managed energy system, with guardians stationed at every critical node to channel, focus, and protect the sacred power contained within. But the power of these temples was not confined to what the eye could see or the mind could conceptualize. The ancient builders understood that true presence is also felt through vibration, through sound, that the very air within these sacred spaces could be sculpted to carry a message. This leads us to one of the most subtle yet profound layers of their design: architectural acoustics. The stones were not just arranged for visual harmony. They were tuned like a colossal musical instrument, engineered to produce specific sonic effects that could alter human consciousness and open a channel to the unseen. The temple itself was given a voice, and that voice was a critical tool for interacting with the guardians believed to dwell within. Consider the extraordinary oracle chamber in the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni on Malta, a labyrinthine underground temple complex dating back over 5,000 years. This small, oval-shaped room is an acoustic marvel. When someone speaks in a deep, resonant tone within the chamber, the sound doesn't just echo. It creates a powerful, bone-rattling reverberation that seems to fill the entire space, vibrating through the very body of the listener. Modern acoustic studies have shown that the chamber's resonant frequency is around 110 Hz, a specific pitch that scientific research has linked to shifts in human brain activity. At this frequency, there can be a decrease in activity in the brain's language centers and an increase in the right hemisphere, which is associated with spatial perception and emotional experience. For the ancient priests who used this space, the effect would have been transformative. The chanting or drumming wasn't just a ritual performance. It was a technological method for inducing an altered state of consciousness. In this trance state, the veil between worlds was believed to thin, allowing the priest or oracle to bypass their ordinary mind and receive prophecies directly from the guardian spirits of the underworld. The temple wasn't just a place to talk to the gods. Its very architecture helped to dissolve the barrier, making the divine audible. This intentional design for sonic interaction is found across the globe in equally precise ways. At the Mayan temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, a simple handclap at the base of the main staircase produces a startlingly unnatural echo. Instead of a dull repetition of the sound, the echo returns as a sharp, descending chirp that bears an uncanny resemblance to the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. The Quetzal, with its brilliant green plumage, was considered the living embodiment of the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. This was not a charming coincidence. The architects calculated the exact spacing and angle of the massive stone steps to function as a diffraction grating, breaking up the sound wave and reflecting it back in this specific, symbolic pattern. For a Mayan pilgrim standing before the temple, the message was unmistakable. A clap of human hands was answered by the cry of the god. It was an audible miracle, a proof that the guardian of the temple was present and responsive, its voice woven into the very fabric of the structure. This acoustic feature turned a casual sound into a divine sign, reinforcing the belief that the boundary between the human and the supernatural was paper-thin. In the classical world, the connection between sacred sound and architecture was equally deliberate. The magnificent open-air theaters of ancient Greece, such as the one at Epidaurus, were often built in close proximity to temples of Asclepius, the god of healing. The near-perfect acoustics of these theaters, where a whisper on the stage can be heard clearly in the highest back row, are legendary, but their purpose extended far beyond entertainment. They were used for performances of hymns and paeans, songs of praise and prayer dedicated to the gods. The flawless sound projection ensured that every word of every prayer, every note of every hymn, was carried clearly and powerfully to the entire audience and by extension to the divine ears of the guardian deities in the nearby temple. The architecture acted as a spiritual amplifier, ensuring that no supplication was lost and that the collective intention of the worshippers was unified and strengthened. It was a way of saturating the entire sacred precinct with harmonious sound, creating an atmosphere of elevated piety that was believed to be pleasing and inviting to the gods. The common thread in all these examples is the understanding that specific resonant frequencies had specific effects. Certain sounds were thought to purify a space, driving away negative or chaotic energies with their harmonious vibrations, much like a bell is rung to clear the air. Other frequencies, often lower and more droning, were used to create a foundation of stability, a sonic anchor that grounded the ritual and prepared the participants for spiritual contact. The voice of the temple was therefore a tool of environmental management. It could shift the mood of a space from one of mundane activity to one of heightened awareness, from anxiety to reverence. By carefully controlling the sonic environment, the priests could orchestrate the emotional and spiritual experience of the worshippers, guiding them toward a collective state where the presence of the guardian could be felt, heard, and communed with. This mastery over sound set the stage both literally and metaphorically for the final, most crucial act, the rituals that would breathe life into the stone and fully awaken the protector within. Yet, even with the celestial alignment set and the acoustics perfectly tuned, a temple remained an empty vessel, a beautifully crafted shell waiting for its soul. The most crucial moment in the entire life of a sacred space was not its completion, but its activation. After years, sometimes decades, of meticulous construction, the final act was a profound ritual designed to bridge the ultimate gap, to transform the magnificent statue of a guardian from a masterpiece of stone into a living, conscious entity. This was the moment of consecration, a ceremony that varied in its details across cultures but shared a universal purpose: to breathe life into the inert and invite the divine to take up permanent residence. The ancient Egyptians possessed one of the most detailed and evocative of these rituals, known as the opening of the mouth. This was not a simple blessing. It was a complex, multi-step procedure performed by specialized priests, believed to magically restore the senses of the statue. Using a ritual adze, a tool shaped like a sculptor's chisel but made of sacred meteoritic iron, the priest would gently touch the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the statue. Each touch was accompanied by specific incantations, a spiritual technology designed to open these organs for their divine function. The ceremony didn't stop there. Offerings of food, drink, and incense were presented directly to the statue's mouth, as if feeding a newborn. The underlying belief was breathtakingly literal. The statue was now capable of seeing the prayers of the devotees, hearing their hymns, smelling the sweet offerings, and consuming the spiritual essence of the food. It was no longer a representation of a god or guardian. It had become a vessel, a direct interface, a physical body for a supernatural being to inhabit and interact with the world. In a similar vein, the Hindu tradition of Pratishta accomplishes the same goal through a different, equally intricate path. The term itself means establishing or installing the deity's presence into the murti or idol. This process can take days and involves a sequence of purification rites, meditative visualization, and the chanting of potent mantras. The core of the ritual involves the priest performing a deep meditation, focusing all their intention on inviting the deity to descend from its celestial abode and enter the statue. This is often accompanied by the offering of the 5 elements Panchamrita, a mixture of milk, yogurt, honey, ghee, and sugar, which is used to bathe the idol, symbolizing the purification and anointing of the divine body. The final act is the opening of the statue's eyes, often with a golden needle, a moment of supreme sanctity when the deity is believed to truly see the world for the first time through its new form. From that point forward, the Murti is treated not as an symbol, but as the living deity itself, deserving of daily care, food, and reverence. The activation of the guardian was not confined to the sanctum alone. It often involved a dynamic procession throughout the entire temple complex. The newly consecrated statue would be carried along a predetermined, ritually purified path. This was far more than a simple parade. This journey served to imprint the guardian's energy onto the route it would spiritually patrol for eternity. As the statue moved through the courtyards, along the colonnades, and past the lesser shrines, it was essentially mapping its domain, charging the entire architectural circuit with its protective presence. For the worshippers lining the path, this procession made the invisible visible. They could witness the guardian taking possession of its home, understanding that its power now permeated every corner of the sacred space. This established a clear spiritual geography, defining the boundaries of the guardian's influence and creating a lived experience of its omnipresence within the temple walls. To sustain this newly awakened life, a symbiotic relationship was established between the community and the guardian. The being was not considered self-sufficient. It required nourishment, just as a living ruler required taxes to maintain their kingdom. This is where practices like blood sacrifices, libations of water or wine, and the burning of specific incenses came into play. A blood sacrifice, often of a valuable animal, was not an act of mere violence but a potent offering of life force, the most precious substance to feed the guardian spirit. Libations of water or wine symbolized the flow of sustenance and gratitude. The choice of incense was equally deliberate. Certain fragrances like frankincense or sandalwood were believed to be particularly pleasing to the gods, their smoke carrying prayers upward and purifying the air. These daily or seasonal rituals were essential maintenance. They were the practical duties of a relationship, a way for the human community to actively participate in the guardian's vigilance, ensuring that the protector remained strong, attentive, and benevolent. The temple became a living ecosystem, a cycle of giving and receiving that bound the fate of the people to the power of their stone sentinel. To truly grasp the genius of the Sphinx, one must first understand that it is not a statue placed upon the Giza plateau, but rather the plateau itself, given a face and a form. While the pyramids were built with millions of quarried blocks, assembled into geometric perfection, the Sphinx was revealed. It is a work of subtraction, not addition. Master sculptors identified a massive outcrop of limestone that was perfect for their vision and carved away everything that was not the guardian. This fundamental distinction is critical. The Sphinx is not an imported entity. It is the awakened spirit of the land, the living bedrock appointed as the eternal watchman. This makes its connection to the pharaoh, whose face it is thought to bear, profoundly symbolic. The king was not just a ruler of people, he was the guardian of Egypt, the intermediary between the gods and the land of the Nile. By merging the pharaoh's likeness with the body of a lion and the very substance of the Egyptian earth, the Sphinx becomes the ultimate expression of this divine guardianship, the pharaoh's duty made permanent in stone, as inseparable from the nation as the plateau is from the desert. The choice of a lion's body is a decision steeped in celestial significance. In the ancient Egyptian sky, the constellation we know as Leo was associated with the lioness goddess Sekhmet, a deity of immense power, both destructive and protective. But the connection goes deeper than simple symbolism. The Sphinx's primary orientation is due east, and on the spring equinox around 2,500 years before the Common Era, an extraordinary event occurred. As dawn broke, the constellation Leo would have been positioned directly behind the Sphinx, with the sun rising on the horizon precisely between its paws. Imagine the spectacle, the lion in the sky appearing to crown the lion on the earth, as the life-giving sun emerged from the horizon it guarded. This alignment was not a one-time spectacle, but an annual reaffirmation of a cosmic covenant. It tied the Guardian's power to the most important cycle known to humanity, the solar cycle, and specifically to the moment of equilibrium and renewal. The Sphinx was thus anchored to a celestial event that guaranteed the rebirth of the sun, and by extension, the rebirth of the pharaoh whose tomb it protected. This perspective forces us to see the Giza complex not as a collection of separate monuments, but as a single, integrated machine designed for celestial resurrection. The controversial Orion correlation theory, while debated, offers a compelling model for this unified design. It proposes that the three Great Pyramids are a terrestrial map of the three stars of Orion's belt. Orion, known to the Egyptians as Osiris, the god of death, rebirth, and the afterlife, was the destination of the pharaoh's soul. The Milky Way, in this analogy, represents the Nile River. If the pyramids are Orion, then the Sphinx, positioned to the east, perfectly mirrors the relationship of the constellation Leo to Orion in the night sky of that era. The entire plateau becomes a massive astral chart, a mirror of the Duat, or the heavenly afterlife. The Sphinx's role in this grand scheme is that of the celestial sentinel, guarding the eastern horizon, the place of sunrise and rebirth, ensuring the pharaoh's soul could successfully navigate from his pyramid tomb, Orion, through the underworld and emerge reborn with the sun. Its physical location on the ground is equally strategic. The Sphinx sits at the very edge of the Giza Plateau, which acts as a stark dividing line between the ordered, sacred world of the necropolis and the vast, unpredictable desert, the realm of chaos or Isfet in Egyptian cosmology. By facing east, the Sphinx does not just face the rising sun. It faces the source of order and turns its back on the chaos. It is the spiritual bulwark, the first and last line of defense for the entire city of the dead. The massive limestone walls of the Sphinx enclosure further enhance this feeling of a protected sacred space, a bastion against the swirling sands of disorder. Every aspect of its positioning, from the cosmic to the topographic, reinforces its primary function: to stand guard at the ultimate threshold, protecting the delicate process of royal transfiguration from any and all disruptive forces. Therefore, to dismiss the Sphinx as merely a large statue or even just a royal portrait is to miss the entire point of its existence. It was the active, conscious heart of the most ambitious sacred machine ever built. It was a guardian designed to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, a geological guardian as the spirit of the living earth, a celestial guardian aligned with the cycles of the sun and stars, and a theological guardian protecting the journey of the divine king. It was not a passive monument but a participant in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, a stone representation of the promise of life after death. This sophisticated fusion of geology, astronomy, and mythology into a single, awe-inspiring entity demonstrates a level of intentionality that is almost beyond our modern comprehension, a holistic vision of the world where every element is interconnected and purposeful. While the Sphinx embodies a guardian carved from the very earth it protects, a journey eastward reveals a philosophy where the guardian flows with the landscape rather than dominating it. In the spiritual traditions of Asia, we encounter the Naga, serpentine deities whose sinuous forms embody the lifeblood of the land itself. These are not static sentinels of stone but dynamic beings associated with water, fertility, and the hidden treasures of the earth. In Hindu and Buddhist mythology, Nagas are powerful protectors of esoteric knowledge, often depicted as half-human, half-cobra, residing in underwater palaces or deep within the earth. This connection to subterranean and aquatic realms made them the perfect symbolic guardians for temples, which were seen as wells of spiritual knowledge requiring protection from both physical and metaphysical corruption. The architecture did not simply house these beings, it became an extension of their fluid, life-giving nature. This concept is masterfully expressed at the Cambodian temple complex of Angkor Wat. Here, the approach to the main temple is not just a path but a profound spiritual journey. The causeway is flanked by magnificent balustrades shaped as the body of a giant, multi-headed Naga, held aloft by a line of devis or gods on one side and asuras or demons on the other. This is a direct representation of the famous churning of the ocean of milk myth, a foundational story of creation. But for the pilgrim walking this path is a reenactment of that cosmic event. The Naga bridge is not merely a handrail, it is a living conduit, a symbol of the bridge between the human world and the celestial realm of the gods. To step onto it is to leave the ordinary world behind, and to proceed toward the central temple is to traverse the axis of the universe, moving from the realm of mortals toward the abode of the divine, all under the watchful, protective gaze of the serpentine guardian. In Chinese temple architecture, a similar principle governs the design of the Dragon Gate, an ornately carved archway that marks the entrance to the sacred precinct. The dragon in Chinese culture is a benevolent and wise creature, a symbol of imperial power, celestial authority, and the life-giving forces of rain and water. Passing through the Dragon Gate is far more than a physical transition. It is a symbolic act of transformation, akin to the mythological carp that leaps over the Dragon Gate to become a dragon itself. The pilgrim, in crossing this threshold, undergoes a spiritual metamorphosis, shedding their profane identity and preparing to enter the sacred space with a purified heart and mind. The dragon guardians carved around the gate are not there to threaten, but to oversee and bless this transformation, ensuring that only those with the right intention complete the passage. The architecture here functions as a machine for spiritual refinement, with the dragon as its presiding intelligence. This integration of guardian and structure reaches a beautiful, functional apex in Japan with the Shachai, mythical creatures with the head of a tiger and the body of a carp. These striking figures are not placed at ground level but are perched on the opposite ends of the main roof ridge of castles and temples. Their form is not just decorative, it is a powerful prayer for protection against a very specific and devastating threat, fire. Traditionally, Japanese buildings were constructed of wood and paper, making them highly vulnerable. The Shachai, as creatures of the water, were believed to have the power to summon rain and extinguish flames. Their placement on the highest point of the building was a strategic act of spiritual defense, turning the entire roof into a protected zone. The Shachai's form, often covered in glittering ceramic tiles, would catch the light, creating a dazzling effect that itself was thought to ward off evil spirits. The guardian is seamlessly woven into the architectural necessity of the roof, its mythic purpose addressing a very real-world danger. What unites these diverse Eastern traditions is a profound emphasis on harmony. Unlike the imposing, confrontational guardians of Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Nagas, dragons, and Shachai are expressions of the landscape's inherent spiritual forces. The Naga is the spirit of the river and the underground spring. The dragon is the genius of the mountain and the storm cloud. The Shachai is the essence of the ocean and the saving rain. The temple is not a fortress imposed upon nature, but an organically integrated structure that channels these natural energies for protection and blessing. The guardian is not a conqueror of the chaotic wilderness, but a manifestation of its innate order and power. This represents a different, yet equally profound, understanding of sacred space, one where architecture seeks to amplify the voice of the natural world rather than speak over it with a monolithic declaration of human will. Across the ocean, in the lush rainforests and highlands of Mesoamerica, a completely different landscape gave rise to a vision of sacred architecture that was equally profound. Here, the Maya and Aztec civilizations looked upon their world and saw a living, breathing entity, a place where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were thin and constantly negotiated. Their towering pyramidal temples were not just buildings, they were intentional recreations of the most sacred feature of their cosmology, the mountain. In a world without the vast stone quarries of Egypt, the mountain was the ultimate symbol of stability, power, and connection to the heavens. It was the dwelling place of gods, the source of life-giving water, and a portal to other realms. By building these artificial mountains, the architects were constructing a direct channel to the divine, and like any sacred peak, these man-made mountains required fierce and powerful protectors. The jaguar and the feathered serpent emerged as the two primary guardians of this vertical cosmos, each embodying a distinct aspect of its dangerous and miraculous energy. The jaguar held a position of terrifying reverence throughout Mesoamerica. As the apex predator of the jungle, it was the undisputed lord of the night, a creature of stealth, strength, and lethal grace. But its significance ran far deeper than its physical prowess. The jaguar was seen as the sun's companion during its perilous journey through the underworld each night. While the sun shone brightly in our world during the day, it was believed to transform into a powerful jaguar to battle the forces of darkness as it traveled through the terrifying realm of Xibalba. This made the jaguar a symbol of death and rebirth, a guardian of the most critical transition of all, the cycle that guaranteed the sun would rise again each morning. This profound symbolism is etched into the very stones of the Temple of the Jaguar at Tikal, a magnificent structure piercing the Guatemalan rainforest canopy. This temple was far more than a royal tomb. It was a conduit, a physical anchor point for the soul of the deceased king to begin its own journey through the underworld, mirroring the path of the jaguar sun. The elaborate jaguar iconography that adorns the temple served as both a declaration of the king's shamanic power to traverse these realms and a plea to the jaguar spirit to protect and guide him on this ultimate voyage. The guardian here is not just protecting a static space, but overseeing a dynamic process of transformation, ensuring that the cycle of death and life continues unbroken. If the jaguar was the master of the earthly and underworld realms, the feathered serpent was the embodiment of the celestial. Known as Cuculcan to the Maya and Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs, this being was a breathtaking synthesis of the earth and the sky, the body of a snake representing the terrestrial world and its hidden wisdom, adorned with the vibrant green feathers of the Quetzal bird, symbolizing the heavens, wind, and spirit. This hybrid creature represented the essential unity of all things, the marriage of the material and the spiritual. It was a god of wind, wisdom, and life itself, and its architectural manifestation represents one of the most brilliant feats of sacred engineering in human history. The famous pyramid at Chichén Itzá, dedicated to Cuculcan, is a masterpiece of celestial alignment and symbolic form. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, as the sun sets, a play of light and shadow unfolds across the northwestern staircase. The stepped corners of the pyramid cast a series of triangular shadows down the balustrade, which connect with massive stone serpent heads at the base. The effect is nothing short of magical. An undulating, diamond-backed shadow serpent appears to slither down from the heavens to the earth. This was not a hidden secret for the priests alone. It was a public spectacle, a visible miracle that demonstrated the god's presence and power to the entire community. The architecture itself became the medium for the Guardian's annual manifestation, a scheduled and reliable display of divine power that reinforced the cosmic order. The placement of these temples was also a precise science of spiritual geography. They were frequently built in direct alignment with naturally occurring portals to the underworld, most notably caves and cenotes. Cenotes, those deep, water-filled sinkholes that dot the Yucatan Peninsula, were considered especially sacred. They were the source of life-giving water in a dry land, but also terrifying gateways to the watery underworld, the domain of the rain gods and dangerous spirits. The great city of Chichen Itza, whose name means "at the mouth of the well of the Itza," was founded around two major cenotes, one of which was used for ritual offerings, including valuable objects and human sacrifices. The Pyramid of Kukulkan, therefore, was not just a standalone structure. It was the regulating heart of a sacred landscape. Its purpose was to guard this volatile portal, to channel the chaotic energies of the underworld into a beneficial force like bringing life-giving rain instead of destructive floods, and to prevent malevolent forces from emerging. The Guardian's role was that of a cosmic diplomat, managing the flow of energy between the worlds. This holistic vision culminates in the concept of the World Tree, a central pillar of Mesoamerican cosmology. The universe was seen as having three primary layers: the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. These realms were connected by a great axis, often visualized as a massive tree, a flowering cross, or most relevantly, a temple pyramid. The pyramid was this world tree made stone. Its base was rooted in the underworld, its staircase was the trunk passing through the middle world of humans, and its summit temple reached into the heavens. The jaguar and the feathered serpent were the guardians of this entire axis. The jaguar protected the base and the descent into Xibalba, while the feathered serpent adorned the summit and facilitated the ascent to the celestial realms. Together, they ensured the safe passage of souls, prayers, and divine energies along this cosmic highway. The architecture was therefore a complete recreation of the mythical landscape, a miniature universe where every element, from the choice of guardian to the alignment with a cenote, worked in concert to maintain the balance of the cosmos. It was a perfect, self-contained system of spiritual ecology, where the temple was not just a place to worship the gods, but the very engine of the world itself. But who were the minds capable of orchestrating such a profound synthesis of stone, sky, and spirit? In the ancient world, the individual we might separate into an architect, an engineer, an astronomer, and a priest was in fact a single, unified role. This was the architect-priest, a figure who stood at the crossroads of the tangible and the invisible, wielding not only surveying tools and mathematical calculations, but also the rituals and visions that could invite the divine into a physical space. To see these master builders as merely skilled craftsmen is to miss the essence of their purpose. They were mediators, translators of a cosmic language, and their primary qualification was not just technical expertise, but a deep, cultivated spiritual insight that allowed them to perceive the blueprint of the universe itself. Consider the immense responsibility placed upon figures like the Egyptian, overseer of all the king's works, the title held by the legendary architect Imhotep, who designed the step pyramid of Djoser. This was no ordinary project manager. His task was to construct an eternal dwelling for the pharaoh's soul, a machine for resurrection that had to function flawlessly for eternity. His decisions, the angle of a corridor, the proportions of a chamber, the specific stone for a statue, were not merely structural or aesthetic choices. They were acts of high spiritual significance. A miscalculation could mean more than a collapsed ceiling. It could mean the pharaoh's spirit would be lost in the afterlife. The overseer's knowledge, therefore, had to be total. He needed to understand geology to quarry the right stone, astronomy to align the pyramid with the imperishable stars, hydrology to keep groundwater from the burial chamber, and theology to know the precise spells and symbols that would protect and guide the royal soul. This was a holistic science where every discipline served a single, sacred goal. This fusion of roles is even more explicitly defined in the Indian tradition of the Asthapati. The Asthapati was not just a builder, he was a master of Vastu Shastra, the ancient science of architecture. The foundational text for this practice describes the creation of a building as the act of giving form to Vastu Purusha, a cosmic being who represents the spirit of the site itself. According to the myth, this being was pinned face down to the earth by the gods, and his body forms a sacred grid or mandala, with different parts corresponding to different deities and cosmic forces. The Asthapati's first and most critical task was to perceive this invisible grid through meditation and ritual. The entire process of construction, from the initial plowing of the soil to the final consecration of the roof, was a meticulous reenactment of this cosmic event. The building's proportions, the orientation of its doors, the placement of its rooms all were dictated by the anatomy of Vastu Purusha. To build in harmony with this cosmic being was to ensure health, prosperity, and spiritual blessing for the inhabitants. To build against his form was to invite chaos and misfortune. The Asthapati's work was therefore a form of healing, aligning the human habitat with the underlying order of the cosmos. Where did these profound designs originate? For the architect-priest, the answer was often not found in a textbook, but in a dream or a vision. Theirs was a receptive art. They saw themselves as channels for a divine intelligence, and their creative process involved quieting their own ego to receive the inspiration for a temple's form. There are accounts of architects spending nights in meditation at a chosen building site, waiting for the deity to reveal the temple's plan to them in a symbolic vision. A dream of a blossoming lotus might dictate the temple's central floor plan. A vision of a towering mountain could inspire the shape of the main shrine. This was considered the only way to ensure the design was truly sacred, a direct download from the source of all creation rather than a product of human imagination. The architect-priest was the skilled interpreter of these visions, translating ephemeral symbols into precise geometric principles and construction techniques that could be executed by teams of artisans. This sacred knowledge was not for public consumption. It was guarded with the utmost secrecy, passed down through initiatory lineages from master to apprentice, often within specific families or priestly castes. The apprentice would not only learn the mathematics of the golden ratio or the astronomical tables for solstice alignments, they would undergo spiritual training to purify their consciousness and develop the intuitive sensitivity required for the work. They learned that wielding this knowledge without the proper spiritual preparation was dangerous, like giving a child the keys to a power plant. The ability to create a dwelling for a god was a sacred trust, and it was believed that a building created by an unqualified person would be spiritually inert or, worse, attract negative energies. This secretive transmission ensured the continuity of a living tradition, one that carried not just information but a state of being, a way of seeing the world as an interconnected, conscious whole. The profound spiritual intentionality we sense in every stone of these ancient temples is the direct legacy of these architect-priests, a testament to a world where building was the highest form of prayer and the architect was the bridge between heaven and earth. Yet for all their brilliance, the worldview that gave birth to these sacred beasts could not last forever. A profound intellectual revolution was stirring, one that would fundamentally reshape humanity's relationship with the cosmos and, in turn, the very soul of architecture. This pivotal moment is often described as the great shift from mythos to logos. Imagine mythos as the ancient, intuitive way of knowing, a truth rooted in sacred stories, ancestral traditions, and the belief that the world is alive with conscious, often unpredictable beings. Logos, by contrast, is the birth of reasoned argument, of seeking truth through observation, logic, and empirical evidence. It was a move from explaining a thunderstorm as the anger of Zeus to understanding it as a phenomenon of atmospheric pressure and electrical discharge. This shift didn't happen overnight, but its epicenter was in ancient Greece, where a new kind of thinker emerged, one who looked at the world and asked not who but how and why. The pioneering minds of Greek philosophy, like Plato and Aristotle, began to systematically dismantle the need for a pantheon of capricious, animal hybrid gods. Plato, while still speaking of a divine craftsman he called the demiurge, proposed that the universe operated according to perfect, eternal forms, abstract blueprints of reality that could be understood through rational thought and mathematics. His student, Aristotle, took this even further, meticulously categorizing the natural world and laying the foundations of the scientific method. For Aristotle, the purpose of a thing could be understood by studying its nature and its causes, not by appealing to the whims of a mythical guardian. This new framework was powerful and compelling. Why pray to a griffin for protection when you could design a city wall based on principles of engineering and military strategy that were predictable, reliable, and based on observable reality? The world was gradually becoming disenchanted, its mysteries yielding to the power of human reason, and the role of the mythical guardian as an explanation for natural forces began to seem increasingly primitive. This philosophical revolution found a powerful and practical expression in the rising Roman Empire. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, absorbed Greek culture but filtered it through their own relentless focus on order, administration, and engineering. While they adopted the Greek gods, renaming Zeus as Jupiter and Aphrodite as Venus, their relationship with them was often more transactional than mystical. Roman architecture reflects this shift in priority. Yes, they built magnificent temples, but their most enduring and celebrated structures were not designed primarily as homes for guardian spirits. Instead, they were monumental public works that served the practical needs of a vast empire. Aqueducts that defied gravity to bring fresh water to cities, vast networks of roads that connected continents, and colossal structures like the Colosseum for public entertainment. The Roman Forum was the bustling heart of civic life, a space for commerce, politics, and law, a world away from the secluded, mysterious inner sanctum of an Egyptian temple. Primary guardian of Rome was not a Sphinx or a Lamassu, but the legions stationed along its borders. Protection became a matter of military logistics, not spiritual invocation. The final and perhaps most decisive blow to the age of sacred beasts came with the rise of the great monotheistic religions, Christianity and later, Islam. These faiths centralized all divine power into a single, omnipotent, and ultimately unknowable God. This was a radical simplification of the spiritual universe. There was no longer a need for a specialized god of the forge, a goddess of the harvest, or a lion-bodied guardian of the horizon. All power flowed from one source. In this new theological landscape, the old protective beings were transformed. They did not vanish entirely, but they were demoted and reassigned. The myriad guardians became angels in Christianity and jinn in Islam, powerful spiritual beings, to be sure, but they were now unquestionably subordinate servants of the one God. Their role changed fundamentally. They were no longer tied to specific locations, a sacred spring, or a particular mountain peak, as independent powers. Instead, they acted as messengers and agents of a universal divine will, sent where God commanded, their protection granted through faith and piety, not through the precise geometric alignment of a temple. The very idea that a human-built structure could house a localized deity became, in the eyes of these faiths, a form of idolatry. This grand rationalization of the world, from the philosophical inquiries of the Greeks to the pragmatic engineering of the Romans and the theological unity of monotheism, gradually stripped architecture of its deepest layer of mythical symbolism. A building's value was increasingly measured by its function, its structural integrity, and its aesthetic appeal according to human-centered principles. The stone was just stone again. The proportions were for beauty and stability, not for attracting cosmic energy. The sacred beast, which had once been the conscious heart of a living temple, was now often viewed as a superstitious relic, a decorative holdover from a less enlightened age. The world had been mapped, measured, and explained, and there seemed to be less and less room for the mysterious, localized guardians of old. Yet, the human psyche has a stubborn need for the symbolic, for the protective image, and this impulse refused to be extinguished completely. It simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for a new age to give it a different form. Yet, even as the age of pharaohs and classical gods receded into history, the deep-seated human need for architectural protection refused to vanish. It simply found a new patron and a new aesthetic, transforming to suit the spiritual landscape of medieval Europe. The grand cosmic blueprints of Egypt and Mesopotamia may have faded from memory, but the instinct to ward off evil with stone and symbol was reborn with startling vitality on the soaring spires of Gothic cathedrals. Here, perched high above the bustling medieval towns, the ancient tradition of the guardian beast was resurrected in the forms of gargoyles and grotesques. To the modern eye, these often humorous or terrifying figures might seem like whimsical decorations, but to the masons who carved them and the congregations who worshipped below, they were a vital line of spiritual defense, a direct echo of the apotropaic, that is, evil-averting function of their ancient predecessors. The most famous of these figures, the gargoyle, has a very practical origin that is often overlooked. The word itself comes from the Old French gargouille, meaning throat or gullet, and this is the key to its primary function. A gargoyle is specifically a carved spout, designed to channel rainwater away from the masonry of the cathedral walls. By projecting the water clear of the building, these ingenious devices protected the stone from erosion, preserving the structure for centuries. But the medieval mind saw an opportunity in this necessity. Why let the water spew from a simple pipe when it could erupt from the mouth of a dragon, a demon, or a monstrous hybrid? This fusion of utility and symbolism is quintessentially medieval. The water pouring from the creature's mouth could be symbolically seen as purifying the ground below, washing away evil influences as it flowed from the sacred building. The gargoyle thus became a two-fold protector. It guarded the physical fabric of the church from the elements, and its fearsome visage guarded the spiritual integrity of the space from demonic incursion. This leads us to the grotesque, a term often used interchangeably with gargoyle, but which technically refers to any carved stone creature that does not function as a waterspout. These figures, which can include everything from mischievous imps to tortured souls and fantastical beasts, were purely symbolic guardians. Their purpose was explicitly apotropaic. The logic behind their often frightening appearance was rooted in a simple, powerful belief, like repels like. The medieval worldview was one of a constant, invisible war between the forces of God and the legions of Satan. To protect a holy place from demons, you needed to station your own demons on the wall's creatures, so terrifying that they would intimidate and scare away any malevolent spirits attempting to enter. A grinning, leering face peering down from a rooftop corner was not just a decoration. It was a spiritual scarecrow, a permanent sentinel whose grotesque appearance was a weapon against the grotesque forces of evil. This concept is a direct inheritance from ancient guardian traditions, from the lion-headed gatekeepers of Assyria to the jackal statues of Egypt, all sharing the common purpose of using formidable imagery to define and defend a sacred boundary. However, to focus solely on the gargoyles and grotesques is to miss the forest for the trees, or rather, the cathedral for the creatures. The entire structure of a Gothic cathedral was itself a monumental guardian, a symbolic fortress designed as an earthly reflection of the heavenly Jerusalem. Every architectural element was charged with theological meaning. The floor plan, laid out in the shape of a cross, oriented the faithful both physically and spiritually, with the altar always in the east toward the rising sun, a symbol of Christ's resurrection and the paradise to come. This deliberate orientation is a clear continuation of the ancient practice of celestial alignment, tethering the sacred space to the cosmic cycle of light overcoming darkness. The cavernous nave, drawing the eye upward along towering columns, was intended to lift the soul toward heaven, while the intricate stone vaulting overhead represented the celestial canopy. Perhaps the most transformative element was the use of stained glass. In ancient temples, light was often controlled and directed to create dramatic effects, like at Abu Simbel. Gothic architects achieved something similar but on a scale never before imagined. They replaced heavy stone walls with vast, intricate windows that acted as massive, illuminated storybooks. These windows did not merely let in light, they transformed it. Sunlight passing through the colored glass became a metaphor for divine light filtering through the scriptures, bathing the interior in a kaleidoscope of sacred narratives in ruby red, sapphire blue, and gold. This created an environment that was otherworldly, a realm of luminous beauty separated from the grim realities of medieval life outside. The cathedral was a protected bubble of holiness, and the light itself became a guardian, purifying the space and illuminating the path to salvation. Therefore, the Gothic cathedral stands as a profound Christian reinterpretation of the ancient temple. The primary guardian was no longer a localized deity like a Naga or a Sphinx, but the omnipotent Christian God. Yet, the enduring human need for tangible, intermediary protectors meant that the walls of this new divine abode were still populated by a bestiary of stone watchers. The gargoyles and grotesques were the medieval equivalent of the Lamassu, adapted to a new theology but serving the same ancient purpose. They represent a fascinating chapter in the story of sacred architecture, where the old instincts of spiritual defense were seamlessly woven into the fabric of a new faith, creating some of the most iconic and enduring sacred spaces the world has ever known. This harmonious blend of symbol, structure, and spirit, however, was about to face its greatest challenge from a world increasingly enthralled by reason and machine. Yet the soaring spiritual aspirations of the Gothic cathedral would soon face an unprecedented challenge, not from a rival faith, but from a fundamental reshaping of human society itself. The arrival of the Industrial Revolution marked a tectonic shift in our relationship with the world, replacing the rhythmic cycles of nature with the relentless churn of the machine. This new age, built on coal, steel, and steam, ushered in the dominance of scientific materialism, a worldview that held that only that which could be measured, weighed, and empirically proven was real. In this starkly rational landscape, the symbolic language of sacred architecture began to sound like a forgotten tongue. The belief that a building could be a dwelling for a spiritual guardian, its form dictated by celestial patterns and sacred geometry, was increasingly dismissed as primitive superstition, a relic of a less enlightened past. Architecture was undergoing a profound disenchantment, shedding its soul in favor of pure function. This new philosophy found its ultimate expression in the architectural movement known as modernism. Pioneered by figures like Le Corbusier and Ludwig mies van der Rohe, modernism championed a radical break from the past. Its famous dictum, "Form follows function," became a mantra for an entire generation of builders. Ornamentation was seen as a criminal deception, a dishonest covering of a building's true purpose. Historical styles with their columns, gargoyles, and intricate carvings were rejected as irrelevant to the modern age. The ideal building was a machine for living efficient, hygienic, and stripped of any sentimental or symbolic baggage. Vast glass curtain walls, raw concrete, and steel frames became the new sacred materials, celebrated for their honesty and efficiency. Primary concerns were no longer cosmic harmony or spiritual protection, but engineering efficiency, cost analysis, and maximizing square footage. The soaring verticality of the cathedral, which once reached for heaven, was replaced by the horizontal spread of the factory and the office block, which served the earthly gods of commerce and industry. This shift had a profound effect on the human experience of space. The modern cityscape, with its grid-like streets and repetitive glass and steel towers, can feel anonymous and alienating. While these buildings are marvels of engineering, they often lack a sense of place, of history, of soul. They could be anywhere in the world, interchangeable modules in a globalized system. The intimate, protective feeling one gets standing in an ancient temple or even a medieval cathedral, the sense of being in a space that cares for your spirit, is largely absent. We built taller and more impressive structures than ever before, but we created environments that often left the human spirit feeling undernourished, adrift in a sea of concrete and glass. The guardian had been evicted, and in its place stood the security camera and the alarm system, a cold, technological substitution for a living, spiritual presence. However, the human yearning for mystery and meaning is remarkably resilient. Even as modernism reached its peak influence in the mid-20th century, a countercurrent began to emerge. The very century that gave us the sterile glass box also witnessed a significant esoteric revival. Movements like Theosophy, spearheaded by figures like Helena Blavatsky, began to dig through the archives of ancient wisdom, rediscovering and repackaging concepts of sacred geometry, ley lines, and earth energies for a modern audience. Later, the New Age movement of the 1960s and 70s popularized these ideas, fostering a renewed fascination with the spiritual potential of our environment. People began to ask again if the places we inhabit could be more than just shelter. They could be tools for healing, meditation, and personal transformation. This was not a return to literal belief in stone guardians, but a revival of the underlying principle that the design of a space can actively influence the consciousness of those within it. A handful of visionary architects dared to swim against the tidal wave of modernism, attempting to re-infuse their work with this lost sense of wonder. The most spectacular example is undoubtedly Antoni Gaudí and his magnum opus, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Gaudí rejected the straight line and the right angle, which he called the work of man, in favor of the organic, flowing curves found in nature, the work of God. Every element of the basilica, from its tree-like columns branching into a stone canopy overhead to its cavernous, forest-like interior, is designed to evoke a sense of being within a living, growing ecosystem. Light filters through stained glass in dazzling hues, not to tell biblical stories in a literal sense, but to bathe the space in an emotional atmosphere of awe and transcendence. Gaudí's approach was highly personalized and deeply mystical, a direct attempt to create a modern sacred space using the language of nature itself. The Sagrada Familia stands as a monumental question mark against the assumptions of modernism, a defiant proof that architecture can still aspire to speak to the human soul. Today, we stand at a fascinating crossroads. The strict dogma of modernism has softened, giving way to a more pluralistic and experimental architectural landscape. There is a growing, if still niche, interest among architects and designers in concepts like biophilia, the idea that humans have an innate affinity for nature, and neuroarchitecture, which studies how building design affects our brainwaves, stress levels, and well-being. This has led to designs that incorporate more natural light, green spaces, and organic forms, not for mere decoration, but with the explicit intention of improving occupant health and happiness. In a sense, this is a scientific validation of ancient intuitions. We may not speak of earth energies, but we now have data showing that a room with certain proportions and access to sunlight can reduce cortisol levels and improve mood. The quest for spiritual resonance is being reborn as a quest for psychological well-being, using the tools of modern science to achieve goals that echo the ancient desire for harmonious space. This movement asks a poignant and urgent question of our time. Can we rebuild a connection to the sacred in our built environment? The challenge is immense. We live in an age of global supply chains, mass production, and intense economic pressures that often prioritize speed and profit over depth and meaning. Yet the longing persists. We see it in the popularity of buildings that evoke a sense of peace, in the trend towards incorporating natural materials, and in the thoughtful design of spaces like hospitals and libraries that aim to soothe and uplift rather than merely house. The guardians may not return as stone griffins or serpentine Nagas, but the essential function they served, the creation of protected, meaningful, and soul-nourishing spaces, is more relevant than ever. The task for a new generation of designers is to learn the old language of intentionality and translate it into a new idiom for a modern world, creating architectures not of fear but of belonging. For centuries, the mystical accounts of echoes that sounded like bird cries or chanting that seemed to shake the very stones were relegated to the realm of legend, the poetic exaggerations of awe-struck pilgrims. But what if we could take those stories into a laboratory? What if we could measure the air inside a 5,000-year-old chamber and analyze its properties with the same precision we apply to a modern concert hall? This is the revolutionary power of archaeoacoustics, a field that has emerged in recent decades to lend a scientific ear to the whispers of the ancient world. By bringing sophisticated tools like audio frequency analyzers, laser scanners, and three-dimensional sound modeling into prehistoric tombs and temples, researchers are making a startling discovery. The acoustic effects described in myth and folklore were not accidental. They were engineered with a sophistication that we are only now beginning to comprehend, providing a startling validation of the intuitive genius of the ancients. The investigation often begins with a simple yet profound observation. At the 5,000-year-old passage tomb of Newgrange in Ireland, a massive, intricately carved stone structure older than Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, visitors have long noted the strange behavior of sound within its central chamber. When an archaeoacoustics team conducted precise measurements, they found that the chamber resonates at a very low frequency, around 8 Hz, which is at the very bottom threshold of human hearing. This is an infrasound frequency, a vibration that is felt more in the body than heard by the ears. Modern studies have shown that exposure to such low frequencies can induce feelings of awe, unease, or even shift brainwave patterns toward more dreamlike states. For the Neolithic people who built Newgrange, a structure aligned to capture the first light of the winter solstice, this sonic environment would have been a powerful component of the ritual experience. The combination of the dramatic sunrise illuminating the dark chamber and the palpable, vibrational hum coursing through the stone would have created a multisensory spectacle, perfectly designed to overwhelm the ordinary senses and facilitate a connection with the ancestral spirits or deities believed to reside there. This deliberate manipulation of sound reaches an even more advanced level at the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a labyrinthine underground temple complex we've mentioned before. Here, archaeoacoustic analysis has confirmed what was long suspected. The so-called oracle chamber is an acoustic masterpiece. The shape of this oval room, carved meticulously from the living limestone, causes certain frequencies of sound to be amplified dramatically while others are dampened. A male voice speaking or chanting in a deep tone within the chamber creates a powerful reverberation that can last for several seconds, an effect that seems to magnify the voice and make it emanate from the walls themselves. This phenomenon, known as a standing wave, can create the sensation that the stone is speaking. For the participants in an ancient ritual, this would have been irrefutable proof of a presence within the temple. The voice of the shaman or priest was no longer their own. It was amplified and transformed by the architecture, becoming the voice of the oracle, the god, or the guardian spirit of the underworld. The chamber was quite literally a tool for vocal transformation, a technological interface with the divine. The question that naturally follows is, how did they achieve this? The answer is being uncovered through technology like 3D laser scanning, which allows researchers to create perfect digital replicas of these ancient spaces. By analyzing these models, they can see that the walls of resonant chambers are not rough or irregular. Instead, they are often sculpted with a specific curvature, their surfaces smoothed and angled in ways that directly influence how sound waves behave. It's the difference between shouting in a random cave and singing in a carefully designed recording studio. The ancient builders were effectively carving giant, solid stone instruments. They understood through trial and error, observation, and perhaps through a form of intuitive knowledge lost to us, that a wall curved in a particular way would reflect sound to a specific spot, or that a niche of a certain depth would create a desired echo. This was not guesswork, it was a precise and applied science of sound propagation, a physics of the spirit. So what was the ultimate purpose of this ancient sonic engineering? The evidence points to several interconnected functions. First, and most practically, was amplification. In an age before microphones, ensuring that a priest's chants or a leader's proclamations could be heard by a large group gathered in a cavernous space was a significant challenge. By designing chambers that naturally amplified the human voice, the architects ensured that the sacred words would carry, unifying the community in a shared auditory experience. Second, and more subtly, was the goal of disorientation. Certain acoustic effects, like complex echoes that seem to come from multiple directions at once, can disrupt our normal spatial awareness. In a ritual context, this sensory disruption is a powerful tool. It breaks down the participants' ordinary perception of reality, making them more receptive to suggestion, visions, and spiritual insights. It's a way of using the environment to gently pry open the doors of perception. Perhaps the most fascinating hypothesis revolves around the idea of brainwave entrainment. Our brains operate at different frequencies depending on our state of mind: beta for alertness, alpha for relaxation, theta for meditation, and delta for deep sleep. Certain rhythmic sounds, like drumming or chanting at a specific tempo, can actually encourage the brain to synchronize with that rhythm, a process called entrainment. Archaeoacoustics has identified resonant frequencies in ancient sites that correspond to the alpha and theta ranges. The repetitive chanting of a mantra in a chamber tuned to these frequencies could have guided an entire group of participants into a synchronized meditative state. This would have created a powerful collective experience, a shared consciousness that felt truly divine. The temple was not just a backdrop for ritual. It was an active participant, using sound as a technology to harmonize the minds and bodies of the worshippers, preparing them for contact with the unseen. In the end, the work of Archaeoacoustics does not diminish the mystery of these places. It deepens it. It shows us that the ancient architect priests were not merely superstitious mystics, but brilliant intuitive scientists and psychologists. They understood the physical properties of sound and the psychological effects of acoustics on human consciousness long before we had the vocabulary to describe them. They framed their understanding in the language of mythology, the voice of the god, the cry of the spirit bird, but their methods were grounded in a sophisticated empirical knowledge of their world. This scientific lens allows us to reverse engineer the intended experience of these spaces, to hear them as the ancients did, we can begin to understand that when a pilgrim stood in the oracle chamber, the vibration they felt was not just a spiritual metaphor, but a physical reality, a carefully calibrated frequency designed to bridge the gap between this world and the next. It reveals a holistic world where science and spirit were not separate disciplines, but two sides of the same sacred coin. But if these guardians are not literal beings, and their architectural homes are not merely functional buildings, what is the source of their enduring power to captivate us across thousands of years and vast cultural divides? The pioneering work of the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung offers a compelling answer, one that moves the discussion from the outer world of stone and sky to the inner world of the human psyche. Jung proposed that beneath our personal conscious minds lies a vast, shared reservoir of psychic material called the collective unconscious. Think of it not as a personal memory bank, but as the inherited, hardwired operating system of the human brain, containing universal patterns and potentials that he called archetypes. These archetypes are not fully formed images, but rather deep currents, fundamental templates for human experience. The mother, the hero, the trickster, and most relevant to our exploration, the guardian. From this perspective, the Sphinx, the Naga, and the Jaguar God are not historical memories of actual creatures, but rather powerful externalizations of these inner psychological forces. They are projections of the deep self onto the canvas of the world. Let's explore how this works with the specific guardians we've encountered. The Great Sphinx, with its enigmatic human head on a powerful lion's body, gazing impassively across the desert, becomes a perfect representation of what Jung termed the self archetype. The self is the central, unifying principle of the psyche, the ultimate goal of psychological growth and wholeness. It is a profound mystery, a synthesis of our conscious personality, the part we know, and the vast, often hidden dimensions of our unconscious. The Sphinx embodies this perfectly. The human face represents our conscious identity, our individual ego, while the massive animal body represents the immense, instinctual power of the unconscious, the part of us we cannot fully comprehend. The Sphinx does not give up its secrets easily. It presents a riddle. This mirrors the challenge of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are, which requires confronting and integrating the unknown parts of ourselves. The guardian is not blocking the path to a physical temple, but symbolically guarding the threshold to self-knowledge. Now consider the Naga, the serpentine deity of Asian traditions. In Jung's framework, the serpent is a quintessential symbol of the unconscious itself, particularly its primal, transformative energy. This aligns beautifully with the Eastern concept of Kundalini, a dormant psychic force imagined as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. When awakened through spiritual practice, this energy is said to rise up through the body, leading to higher states of consciousness and enlightenment. The Naga, often depicted as a multi-headed cobra guarding temples and water sources, is a magnificent personification of this potent, life-altering force within the human psyche. It represents the raw, untamed power of our deepest instincts and creative potential. To encounter the Naga at the temple gate is not to meet an external deity, but to come face to face with the tremendous energy contained within our own unconscious, an energy that must be respected and navigated wisely on the path to wholeness. Then we have the Jaguar God of Mesoamerica, the fierce lord of the night and the underworld. This guardian corresponds powerfully to another critical Jungian concept, the shadow. The shadow is the part of our personality that we repress, deny, or deem unacceptable, our hidden fears, aggressive impulses, and primal instincts. It is not inherently evil, but it is undeniably powerful and potentially destructive if left unacknowledged. The jaguar, as a master of the dark jungle and a creature of lethal prowess, is an ideal symbol for this dark, potent aspect of ourselves. The Maya and Aztec temples, often functioning as portals to the underworld, symbolize a descent into this shadow realm. Confronting the Jaguar God in the depths of the temple is a symbolic act of confronting our own shadow. It is a necessary, if frightening, step in the process of individuation, because we cannot become whole by embracing only the light. We must also make peace with the darkness within. The Guardian challenges us to acknowledge and integrate these rejected parts, transforming their raw power into a source of strength and vitality. This radically reframes our understanding of the temple itself. It is no longer just a physical building dedicated to an external god. It becomes a symbolic map of the human psyche. The entire architectural journey from the outer walls through the guarded gateways along the processional path and finally into the dark, silent inner sanctum can be seen as a metaphor for the journey inward. Each threshold guarded by a mythical beast represents a psychological barrier we must cross. The intimidating Lamassu at the palace gate is the resistance of the ego, fearful of what it might discover about itself. The long, decorated passageways are the gradual process of self-exploration, and the final, sacred chamber, the Holy of Holies, is the deepest core of the self, a place of profound peace and integration that can only be reached after successfully passing the tests posed by the inner guardians. The temple, in this light, is the ultimate tool for psycho-spiritual navigation, a three-dimensional guidebook for the soul's journey toward wholeness. This Jungian reinterpretation does not diminish the sacredness of these places. In many ways, it deepens it. It explains why a modern visitor, with no cultural or religious connection to ancient Egypt or Cambodia, can still feel a shiver of awe standing before the Sphinx or walking the Naga bridge at Angkor Wat. These structures resonate not because we believe in the literal existence of the guardians, but because they are speaking the native language of our own unconscious minds. They are giving form to formless, universal psychological dramas. The archetypes are universal, and when we encounter their symbolic expression in such grand and intentional form, something deep within us recognizes itself. The architecture acts as a key, unlocking a door to a part of ourselves we rarely visit. It is a catalyst for introspection, a mirror held up not to our faces but to our souls. This perspective also creates a fascinating bridge between ancient spirituality and modern psychology. The rituals performed in these temples, the purification before entry, the offerings, the meditative journey can be seen as ancient technologies for facilitating the process of individuation. The act of making an offering to a guardian statue becomes a symbolic act of acknowledging and appeasing an inner archetype. The journey to the inner sanctum becomes a guided meditation into the depths of the self. The ancients, in their own symbolic language, were engaged in the same fundamental quest that drives modern therapy and self-discovery, the quest to understand the self and to achieve a state of psychological wholeness. They just used the vocabulary of myth and stone, while we use the vocabulary of science and introspection. The goal, however, remains strikingly similar. Therefore, the secret architecture of sacred beasts is not merely a historical curiosity or an archaeological puzzle. It is a testament to the enduring human need to understand the landscape of our own interiority. We built these magnificent structures not only to house gods but to map the psyche. The guardians were placed at the thresholds of our temples because they first stood guard at the thresholds of our minds. They represent the challenges we must face, the energies we must harness, and the shadows we must integrate on the path to becoming complete human beings. The stones of these ancient sites hold a double mystery. They are monuments to humanity's relationship with the divine, and equally, they are blueprints for the greatest adventure of all, the exploration of the self. And so we arrive at our own era, a time not of quarried stone but of rendered pixels, where the age-old human impulse to create and inhabit sacred spaces has undergone its most radical transformation yet. The digital realm, once a sterile landscape of ones and zeros, has blossomed into a new frontier for the human spirit, complete with its own temples, its own pilgrimages, and its own pantheon of guardians. We no longer need to travel to a physical location to experience a sense of awe. We can simply put on a headset or log into a vast, persistent world. In these digital landscapes, the archetype of the guardian has not vanished. It has been reborn, coded into the very algorithms that shape our virtual experiences. The journey that once took an initiate through the guarded gates of Karnak now unfolds on the screen as a player navigates the treacherous, beautifully crafted dungeons of a video game. Consider the structure of a classic fantasy role-playing game. A player taking on the mantle of a hero must often venture into a long-forgotten temple or a cursed citadel. The path is never straightforward. It is a labyrinthine challenge filled with environmental puzzles and lesser enemies, all designed to test the hero's skill and resolve. This entire sequence is a direct digital descendant of the ancient ritual journey. The dungeon is the sacred precinct, a space set apart from the ordinary game world by its danger and its rewards. And waiting at its heart, in the innermost chamber, the digital equivalent of the temple's Holy of Holies, is the boss. This is the Guardian, a colossal, mythical beast of immense power, often a dragon, a demon, or a twisted amalgamation of creatures. Defeating it is never just a test of button-mashing skill, it is a rite of passage. The victory is accompanied by a crescendo of music, a shower of rewards, and a profound sense of accomplishment. This is the modern echo of the hero overcoming the temple guardian to claim a divine boon or sacred knowledge. The game designers are the new architect priests, consciously using these archetypal patterns to create meaningful, emotionally resonant experiences for millions. These virtual worlds are not chaotic. They are built with their own strict internal logic, a kind of digital sacred geometry. The layout of a level, the placement of obstacles, the pacing of challenges, all are meticulously designed to guide the player's emotional journey, building tension and culminating in a climactic encounter. The awe-inspiring vista of a floating city in a game, or the haunting silence of a ruined cathedral, can evoke feelings of wonder and reverence that are strikingly similar to those experienced in physical sacred spaces. The tools have changed, but the goal remains the same: to construct an environment that transcends the mundane and facilitates a transformative experience. Even the acoustic principles we explored in ancient sites have their parallels. Game sound designers carefully craft audio landscapes, using spatial sound to create atmosphere, and specific musical leitmotifs to signal the presence of danger or divinity, much like the chants that once echoed through stone chambers. Beyond the structured narratives of games, a different kind of sacred space has emerged in the form of online communities. Forums, social media groups, and knowledge bases dedicated to everything from academic research to fan cultures function as non-physical temples of ideas. These are spaces where people gather around a shared passion or purpose, forming a digital congregation. And just as ancient temples required protection, these communities have their own guardians, the moderators and administrators. Their role is to uphold the community's standards, to defend the sacred space of civil discourse from the modern-day equivalents of chaotic spirits, the trolls, the spammers, and the purveyors of misinformation. They enforce rules that are the digital counterpart of ritual purity, ensuring that the space remains a safe and meaningful haven for its members. The karma points, the upvotes, the badges of honor, these are the new symbols of status and respect within these digital tribes, replacing the offerings and titles of old. This migration of our symbolic life to the digital realm raises profound and urgent questions about the future of spiritual experience. If we can design a virtual temple that evokes genuine awe, does that make the experience less valid? When a community mourns the loss of a shared online world, as happened with the closure of original virtual worlds like Star Wars Galaxies, is the grief any less real than that felt for a physical place of worship that has fallen into ruin? We are only beginning to grapple with the implications. Some visionaries are already experimenting with fully immersive virtual reality meditative experiences, constructing serene digital gardens and tranquil spaces for contemplation that are accessible to anyone with a headset, anywhere in the world. This could democratize access to beautifully designed, peaceful environments, but it also risks reducing profound spiritual states to a consumable product. The fundamental human needs, however, remain constant. We still seek meaning, we still need community, and we still require protected spaces where we can explore the depths of our identity and our connection to something larger than ourselves. The digital age has not erased these needs, it has simply provided a new canvas upon which to project them. The guardians have shed their stone skin and taken on new forms as digital avatars and coded algorithms, but their essential function endures. They still mark the thresholds, they still present the challenges, and they still protect the treasures of our collective imagination. As we continue to build and inhabit these new worlds, we are participating in the oldest story of all, the endless human endeavor to create order out of chaos, to build shelters for our spirits, and to populate them with the protectors that give our journeys purpose and meaning. But preserving these ancient wonders involves a battle on two very different fronts. The first is a physical war against the relentless forces of decay. Wind and rain slowly sand away the intricate carvings on a Maya stele. Industrial pollution eats away at the marble of the Parthenon. The very breath and touch of millions of tourists, each one adding a minuscule amount of wear, gradually polish smooth the steps of the Great Pyramid. This is a fight we understand well, one of engineering, chemistry, and careful restoration. We can build scaffolds, apply protective coatings, and even use laser scanning to monitor the slightest shifts in the ancient stone. This is the tangible legacy, and its conservation is a monumental yet straightforward task of physical preservation. However, a more subtle and complex challenge has emerged, one that moves beyond the realm of mortar and into the realm of spirit. There is a growing conversation among archaeologists, historians, and spiritual practitioners about conserving the intangible heritage of these places, what the Romans called the genius loci, or the spirit of the place. This is the unique atmosphere, the palpable sense of awe, the quiet energy that many visitors report feeling when they stand alone in an ancient sanctuary. It's the product of centuries of focused intention, of rituals performed with absolute belief, of countless human hearts and minds projecting reverence into the same space. This subtle resonance is not something you can measure with a tool, but many argue it is as real and as fragile as the stone itself. The primary threat to this energetic legacy is the nature of modern mass tourism. Imagine a site like the main terrace of Machu Picchu at midday. Instead of a solitary priest awaiting a celestial event, the space is filled with the chatter of 1,000 conversations in a dozen languages, the constant click of camera shutters, and the hurried movement of groups following flag-waving guides. This creates a cacophony of chaotic, scattered energy. The very purpose of the visit shifts from contemplative pilgrimage to efficient sightseeing. For those who believe these spaces were designed to hold and focus a specific spiritual frequency, this constant, low-grade chaos acts like static on a radio signal, drowning out the subtle vibrations that were so carefully cultivated. The sacred silence, which the architects used as a canvas for their acoustic marvels, is shattered. In response, a new philosophy of conservation is taking root. It's not just about limiting the number of visitors to reduce physical wear, but about managing the quality of the visit to protect the sanctity of the experience. At some sites, you now see the implementation of silent zones. In these areas, guides lower their voices and visitors are encouraged to put away their phones and simply be present. The goal is to recreate, even for a few minutes, the conditions of reverence for which the space was designed. Other locations have begun offering special early morning or evening access, times when the light is softer and the crowds are gone, allowing for a more personal and reflective encounter. The act of removing one's shoes before entering a sacred space, a practice common in many Asian cultures, is being gently encouraged elsewhere as a simple but powerful gesture of respect that signals a transition from a profane to a sacred state of mind. This leads us to a profound and difficult question. Can a place like the Great Pyramid, with a steady stream of visitors flowing through its narrow passages every 10 minutes, still truly function as a sacred space? Or has it been effectively reduced to a magnificent museum piece, an archaeological artifact to be observed from behind a rope barrier? The answer may depend entirely on the intention of the person who enters. For the tourist on a tight schedule, it is a historical monument, but for the individual who arrives with a mindful heart, who finds a quiet corner away from the crowd to simply sit and absorb the atmosphere, the potential for a genuine, personal connection remains. The energetic blueprint is still there, etched into the stone, waiting to be activated by a receptive consciousness. This challenge forces a crucial introspection about what we, as a global society, truly value about these places. Are they merely open-air museums, valuable only for the historical data they provide? Or do we acknowledge that they might possess a different kind of value, a living potential to inspire awe, facilitate peace, and connect us to something transcendent? The way we choose to conserve and manage these sites, whether we prioritize crowd control and revenue or intentionality and atmosphere, is a direct reflection of our answer. It is a choice between treating our shared heritage as a collection of beautiful, dead objects, or as living entities whose deepest secret is not just in their stones, but in the silent spaces between them. The most magnificent temple, with its perfectly aligned stones and awe-inspiring guardians, would remain incomplete if it were simply stumbled upon. The ancients understood that the destination was only the final note in a long and carefully composed symphony. The true magic began not at the temple gates, but miles away at the pilgrim's own front door. The journey itself was a sacred technology, a slow, deliberate process of unwinding the coils of everyday life and reorienting the soul toward the divine. This was the power of pilgrimage, an intentional journey where the path was as holy as the place it led to. The architects of these sacred sites didn't just design buildings, they designed experiences, and the pilgrimage route was the first and most crucial chapter of that experience. Imagine setting out on foot, leaving behind the familiar sights and sounds of your village. The further you walk, the more the mundane concerns, the worries about the harvest, disputes with neighbors, the clutter of daily routines begin to loosen their grip. This shedding of the ordinary self was not a passive side effect, it was the entire point. The hardship of the journey, the blistered feet, the exposure to the elements, the simple act of relying on the hospitality of strangers was a form of active purification. It was a ritual of simplification, forcing a focus on the essentials. The next step, a drink of water, a safe place to sleep. This physical stripping away mirrored a spiritual one, creating a clean slate, a receptive emptiness within the traveler that the temple's power could later fill. The long road acted as a filter, ensuring that only those with sufficient dedication and a mind cleared of distraction would arrive at the sacred threshold. This transformative journey was not a random trek through the wilderness. It was a carefully choreographed progression along a preordained sacred geography. The route was dotted with way stations, markers, and smaller shrines that served as spiritual stepping stones. In Japan, the pilgrimage to the 88 temples of Shikoku is a perfect example. Each temple along the circuit is not merely a stop for rest. It represents a stage on the path to enlightenment, with its own specific deity and associated lesson for the pilgrim to contemplate. Similarly, the Camino to Santiago de Compostela in Spain is marked by churches, crosses, and refuges that provide not just physical shelter, but moments for prayer and reflection. These intermediary sites allowed the pilgrim to gradually acclimate to the increasing sanctity of the landscape. They were like rehearsal spaces where one could practice the reverence required for the final, grand performance at the main temple. The entire route became a linear mandala, a path of transformation where each mile traveled and each shrine visited brought the pilgrim closer to a state of spiritual readiness. And then, after days or weeks of travel, came the moment of crescendo, the first glimpse of the destination. Emerging from a forest path or cresting a hill to see the temple complex in the distance, its guardian statues just visible on the horizon, was a moment of profound emotional power. This was not an accidental view, it was meticulously engineered. The approach to many ancient sites was designed to frame this first revelation in the most dramatic way possible. The sight of those distant, silent sentinels validated every hardship of the journey. It transformed fatigue into exhilaration and longing into certainty. That first view was a promise fulfilled, a visual anchor that pulled the pilgrim forward with renewed purpose. The final steps of the approach were often the most intense, a slow, deliberate closing of the distance under the unwavering gaze of the guardians, building a palpable sense of anticipation that reached its peak at the very threshold. This carefully managed approach seamlessly transitioned into the temple's own architectural narrative. The temple was not designed to be comprehended all at once. It was a sequence of revelations. A pilgrim would first pass through the massive outer walls, leaving the profane world definitively behind. Then they would enter a series of increasingly sacred courtyards, each one more restricted and ornate than the last. The path would narrow, forcing a single-file procession, heightening the feeling of individual focus. The ceilings might lower, creating a sense of compression before opening up into a grand hall. This spatial choreography, the narrowing and widening of paths, the play of light and shadow, the gradual unveiling of the inner sanctum, was a physical manifestation of the inner journey. It guided the pilgrim's emotions, building anticipation with every step, until they stood finally before the main guardian statue in the Holy of Holies. The entire structure was a machine for managing consciousness, leading the visitor on a final, miniature pilgrimage from the entrance to the heart of the mystery. This ancient understanding holds a powerful key for the modern visitor. We may now arrive at these sites by bus or car, covering in hours a distance that once took weeks. But the potential for a transformative experience is not lost. It simply requires a shift in intention. The pilgrimage does not have to be measured in miles. It can be measured in attention. Choosing to visit a sacred site with mindful intention is the modern equivalent. It means leaving behind the distractions of the digital world, the phone, the camera, for a few precious moments, and allowing oneself to be present. It means walking the final approach slowly, consciously, observing the way the light falls on the stone, feeling the texture of the ancient pathway underfoot. It means pausing at the gateways, not just to take a picture, but to mentally cross a threshold, to make an internal commitment to be open to the atmosphere of the place. By consciously engaging in this way, we can recapture a fraction of that ancient process. We can transform a sightseeing trip into a personal pilgrimage, reminding ourselves that the greatest journeys are often not about the distance covered, but the depth of attention brought to each step. Standing before the great Sphinx, an Egyptologist sees a pharaoh's likeness and a monument to royal power. A geologist, however, sees the specific Mokatam limestone formation, its layers telling a story of ancient seabeds and revealing why its lower sections have weathered so severely. An astronomer calculates the precise celestial alignments that would have framed it at the time of its creation, while a psychologist contemplates the raw, archetypal power of the lion-human hybrid. Each expert holds a vital piece of the puzzle, but the true picture only emerges when we fit them all together. This is the essential power of an interdisciplinary approach. It shatters the silos of specialized knowledge, revealing that the ancient builders did not distinguish between science, art, and spirituality. For them, these were facets of a single, unified reality, and their architecture was the ultimate expression of this holistic vision. To see the temple as they intended, we must learn to see with this fused perspective, understanding that the choice of stone, the celestial alignment, the mythic narrative, and the psychological impact were all threads in a single, intricately woven tapestry. Consider how this synthesis works in practice. Archaeology provides the foundational facts, the chisel marks, the pottery shards, the stratigraphic layers that date the structure. It tells us what was built and when, but archaeology alone cannot tell us why a particular stone was chosen from a quarry 50 miles away when suitable stone was available locally. For that, we need materials science to analyze the stone's composition and acoustic properties, and we need comparative mythology to understand the spiritual significance of that distant quarry's location in the culture's creation stories. Similarly, the precise astronomical alignment of a temple, meticulously mapped by modern software, is just a curious fact until we layer it with the mythic narratives that explain why the summer solstice sunrise was associated with a specific deity's annual rebirth. The alignment was the physical mechanism for a spiritual event, a scheduled moment of divine interaction. One discipline gives us the clockwork, the other gives us the reason the clock was built. This fusion becomes even more profound when we bring in the insights of depth psychology. The terrifying visage of a Mesoamerican Jaguar God is, from an archaeological standpoint, an artistic representation of a deity. But through a Jungian lens, it transforms into a powerful externalization of the human shadow, the repressed, instinctual part of ourselves. The temple's dark, labyrinthine passage leading to the idol becomes a symbolic journey into the unconscious. The act of confronting the statue in its inner sanctum mirrors the psychological process of confronting and integrating our own hidden fears and desires to achieve wholeness. Suddenly, the architecture is not just a setting for ritual, it is an active participant in a drama of personal transformation. The stones themselves become a guidebook for the soul, their layout a map of the psyche. This doesn't invalidate the archaeological or mythological interpretation. It adds a profound, universal layer of meaning that explains why these spaces can resonate so deeply with people from completely different cultural backgrounds today. The field of archaeoacoustics provides perhaps the most stunning example of this synthesis, because it uses hard science to validate intuitive ancient knowledge. When researchers measure the resonant frequency of the oracle chamber in Malta and find it amplify sound at 110 Hz, a frequency known to alter brainwave patterns, they are gathering empirical data. This is pure physics, but when we then place that data alongside historical accounts of oracular trances and rituals performed in that same chamber, the two strands of evidence, the scientific and the historical, braid together into a coherent whole. The science explains the mechanism behind the mystical experience. It shows that the priests weren't merely superstitious. They were brilliant intuitive physicists and psychologists who understood how to use the material world to manipulate consciousness. The stone was not just a building material, it was a resonant instrument carefully tuned to facilitate a specific spiritual state. This is the ultimate breakdown of the barrier between science and spirituality, demonstrating that the ancients were exploring the same fundamental human consciousness that we study today, just with a different vocabulary. This interdisciplinary model reveals the temple as a unified field of meaning. Every single element, no matter how small, was part of a coherent, intentional system. The source of the stone was not a logistical decision. It was a spiritual one, importing the sacred essence of a distant mountain. The geometric proportions of the floor plan were not merely aesthetic. They were a cosmic blueprint designed to attract and stabilize divine energy. The placement of a guardian statue at a corner was not just decorative. It was a strategic fortification of a spiritually vulnerable point. Even the daily rituals, the offerings of food, the burning of incense were not empty ceremonies. They were the necessary maintenance required to sustain the symbiotic relationship between the human community and the guardian spirit that dwelled within the architecture. From the grandest alignment with a star to the smallest grain of quartz in the granite, everything was interconnected and everything mattered. Therefore, to study these places through only one lens is to miss the symphony for a single note. The geologist hears the earth, the astronomer hears the heavens, and the psychologist hears the mind. But the ancient builders composed a piece of music where all these instruments play in perfect harmony. The true secret of the sacred beast architecture is not found in any one discipline, but in the spaces between them. It is in the recognition that a building can be a geological formation, an astronomical observatory, a psychological model, and a living entity all at once. By daring to bring these disparate fields into conversation, we do more than just solve an archaeological mystery. We begin to recover a lost way of seeing the world, a holistic, participatory vision where humanity, nature, and the cosmos were part of a single, conscious, and beautifully designed whole. This integrated understanding naturally leads us to ponder the very nature of the belief that powered this entire system, forcing us to ask a question that has intrigued scholars for centuries. This brings us to one of the most fascinating and difficult questions we can ask about these ancient minds. When an Egyptian priest bowed before the Sphinx, did he genuinely believe a lion god was consciously looking back at him from the stone? Or was it all an elaborate metaphor? The modern, Western tendency is to see these as mutually exclusive options. Either it was a literal truth or a symbolic fiction. But the evidence points to a third, more complex possibility, a way of thinking that modern scholars sometimes call mythopoeic thought. In this worldview, the symbolic and the literal are not separate categories, they are fused together. The symbol doesn't just represent the power, it participates in it. The Sphinx was simultaneously a massive statue of limestone and the living embodiment of a protective solar force. To ask which one it really was might be to ask the wrong question entirely. To understand this, we must consider the different layers of ancient society. For the vast majority of people, the farmers, the laborers, the artisans, the guardian was almost certainly a literal, conscious entity. Their daily experience of the world was one of direct interaction with powerful, often unpredictable forces. The sun rose and set, the Nile flooded and receded, diseases struck without warning. In such a world, it was a logical and comforting necessity to believe that a powerful, visible being like the Sphinx was actively standing guard against the chaos of the desert, ensuring the sun would rise again and the cosmic order would be maintained. Their relationship with the guardian was likely one of simple, profound faith and transactional reverence, much like a villager might believe in the protective spirit of a local forest or mountain. However, for the educated priestly class, the architects and theologians who designed the rituals and understood the complex astronomy and geometry, the understanding was likely far more nuanced. These individuals were not naive, they were the scientists and philosophers of their age. It is difficult to imagine that a high priest who could calculate the precession of the equinoxes would have held a childlike belief in a literal lion god residing in a rock. For them, the guardian probably functioned as an immensely powerful symbol, a focal point for abstract natural forces, philosophical concepts, and psychological truths. The Sphinx symbolized the pharaoh's power, the stability of the state, the triumph of order over chaos, and the mysterious union of human intelligence with animal instinct. But, and this is the critical point in the mythopoeic worldview, a symbol of such potency was never just a symbol. It was an effective conduit. This distinction is beautifully illustrated by the rituals themselves. Take the opening of the mouth ceremony. From a modern, purely rational perspective, the idea of touching a statue's mouth with a tool to restore its senses seems like pure superstition. But if we view it through the lens of the priestly class, it becomes a different kind of act. It was a ritual of activation, a performative technology that used precise actions, words, and intentions to switch on the symbolic power of the statue. The priest may not have believed the stone lips would magically part to eat the offerings, but he absolutely believed that by performing the ritual correctly, he was creating a legitimate channel for divine energy to flow into the world. The effectiveness was not in the literal animation of the stone, but in the successful alignment of human intention with cosmic principle through the medium of the symbol. The ritual made the symbol alive with function. A helpful modern analogy can be found in theoretical physics. A physicist uses the concept of a string to explain the fundamental vibrations that make up subatomic particles. The physicist knows that these are not tiny, physical pieces of thread. The term is a metaphor, a mathematical model for something incredibly abstract. Yet, this metaphorical model is incredibly effective. It produces testable predictions and helps advance our understanding of the universe. The physicist operates on two levels simultaneously, understanding the metaphor as a model, while also treating it as a functionally real framework for exploration. Similarly, the ancient priest could understand the Sphinx as a complex symbol, while fully engaging with it as a functionally real entity within the ritual context. The power of the system was its multivalent nature, its ability to hold multiple layers of meaning at once, providing a complete and satisfying experience for every level of understanding, from the illiterate farmer to the master astronomer. This layered reality is what made the architecture so essential. The temple and its guardians provided the stable, physical ground upon which this multi-level interaction could reliably occur. For the common person, it was the literal house of the god. For the priest, it was a precisely calibrated spiritual instrument. For the state, it was a symbol of political power and cosmic order. The architecture successfully contained all these meanings without contradiction. It was this very ambiguity, this richness of interpretation, that gave these sacred spaces their enduring power. They were not built to convey a single dogmatic truth, but to facilitate a wide spectrum of human experience with the divine, from the simplest prayer to the most profound philosophical contemplation. The stones themselves became a silent language capable of speaking to every heart and mind in the way it was best prepared to hear. Imagine a master architect in ancient Egypt, not with a computer or a printed blueprint, but with a mind trained through decades of silent observation and whispered lessons. The most profound secrets of their craft were never meant for parchment or public squares. This was knowledge of a different order, the intuitive grasp of how a specific stone would sing when struck, the exact angle of sunlight needed to ignite a crystal embedded in a wall, the silent meditation required to feel the energetic currents of a building site. This deep, tacit understanding was the lifeblood of sacred construction, and it was protected with immense seriousness within closed esoteric schools and priestly lineages. We are not simply talking about trade secrets like a better way to mix mortar. We are talking about a complete cosmological system, a way of seeing the world where every measurement, every material, and every ritual gesture was infused with spiritual significance. The loss of this living tradition is perhaps the greatest chasm separating us from the full experience of these ancient wonders. This knowledge was primarily transmitted orally, from master to carefully chosen apprentice, often over a lifetime. The reason for this secrecy was twofold. Firstly, it was believed that this powerful knowledge was dangerous in the wrong hands. Just as you wouldn't give a beginner the keys to a nuclear reactor, the ancients felt that the ability to shape spiritual energy through architecture required a correspondingly shaped consciousness. An individual who had not undergone the rigorous spiritual and ethical training could, even with the best intentions, create a building that was spiritually dissonant or unstable. Secondly, and more profoundly, much of this knowledge was considered ineffable. It could not be fully captured in words. It was a form of know-how that had to be absorbed through direct experience, through watching a master's hands feel the grain of a stone, or through participating in the charged atmosphere of a consecration ritual. You can write down the musical notes to a symphony, but you cannot capture the soulful interpretation of a master musician on the page. That must be heard, felt, and internalized. This is precisely why the few ancient architectural texts that have survived, while invaluable, feel like fragments of a much larger puzzle. The Roman architect Vitruvius, in his work De Architectura, gives us fantastic details about proportions and column types, but his descriptions of the deeper spiritual intentions behind these choices are often vague or entirely absent. He was writing for a Roman audience that was already becoming more pragmatic and less mystically inclined. Similarly, the Indian Shilpa Shastras are extensive manuals filled with intricate rules for every aspect of temple construction, from the exact proportions of a deity's statue to the proper rituals for every phase of building. Yet, these texts are notoriously cryptic. They might instruct a sculptor to capture the feeling of a blossoming lotus in the face of a statue, or to ensure a pillar has the strength of an elephant and the grace of a swan. These are poetic and profound instructions for an initiate who has spent years understanding the symbolic language, but for a modern builder, they are beautiful, frustrating metaphors, not engineering specifications. This loss of the living context is the fundamental reason why our modern attempts to replicate the effects of these ancient spaces so often fall flat. We can use lasers to measure the Parthenon and confirm its use of the golden ratio with digital precision. We can 3D print a perfect scale model of the Hypogeum in Malta. We can even write a computer program to chant the exact mantras used in its chambers. But what we recreate is an empty shell. We have the blueprint, but we lack the animating spirit. We have the technology, but not the consciousness that originally guided it. It is the difference between perfectly reproducing the words of a sacred poem in a language you don't understand and speaking those same words with the heartfelt conviction of a true believer. The acoustic resonance might be identical, but the transformative power is absent because the intention, the shared belief, and the cultivated energy of the tradition are missing. This profound gap is what fuels much of alternative archaeology and esoteric study to this day. It is a quest that goes far beyond a simple desire for historical facts. It is a search for a lost way of being in the world. Researchers and practitioners delve into folk traditions, study the practices of remaining indigenous cultures that maintain a sacred relationship with their environment, and experiment with personal meditation in these ancient sites, trying to listen to what the stones might still whisper. This is not merely an attempt to recover a list of forgotten techniques. It is an attempt to recover a holistic perception where matter and spirit are not separate realms, but intimately connected facets of a single, conscious universe. The ultimate goal is to understand not just how they built, but why, and to grasp the worldview that made such sublime integration of art, science, and spirit not only possible but necessary. The loss we mourn is not just one of information, but of imagination, a way of seeing that could look at a barren plateau and envision a celestial guardian, or listen to the wind in a canyon and hear the voice of a god. So, if the core principles of sacred architecture are harmony, intentionality, and protection, how might they be reborn in a world of smart cities and biomaterials? The answer may lie in the emerging frontier of bioarchitecture, a philosophy that moves beyond simply building on the land to building with it, in a way that echoes the ancient integration of the Sphinx with the Giza Plateau. This isn't about pastiche or recreating stone temples. It's about translating an ancient wisdom into a future language. Imagine a structure that isn't just designed to look organic, but is fundamentally alive in its processes. Think of a building with a kind of nervous system, a network of sensors embedded throughout its structure that constantly monitors air quality, light levels, sound vibrations, and even the emotional state of its occupants through anonymized biometric data. This building wouldn't just have a guardian statue at its door. The entire edifice would become the guardian. Its responsive skin could adjust its porosity to filter pollutants or welcome fresh air. Its lighting could shift spectrum and intensity to support our natural circadian rhythms, combating the fatigue of artificial environments. In this vision, the protective function of the ancient sentinel evolves into a holistic, ambient system dedicated to safeguarding the physical and mental well-being of everyone within, creating a sanctuary from the overwhelming stimuli of modern life. This leads to a radical shift in how we create form itself. For millennia, architecture has been an act of assembly, quarrying, cutting, and stacking inert materials. But what if we could grow our buildings? This is the promise of biomimicry, where we learn from nature's genius. Researchers are already experimenting with growing bricks from mycelium, the root network of fungi, which are not only sustainable but actively filter toxins. Others are exploring the use of bacteria that can produce limestone, effectively allowing structures to self-heal cracks. Envision a future where the core structure of a building is not built but cultivated, perhaps from a seed-like capsule that grows into a resilient, living framework. This fundamentally changes our relationship with our shelters. Instead of being separate from nature, the building becomes an extension of the ecosystem, breathing, adapting, and even participating in the carbon cycle. This mirrors the ancient belief that a temple was a living part of the landscape, charged with its own spirit. The guardian is no longer an applied decoration, but is intrinsic to the very substance of the building, its life force intertwined with the health of the environment and its inhabitants. The ancient practice of celestial alignment also finds a powerful new purpose in this future, where the builders of Karnak aligned their temples to capture the symbolic power of the equinox sun. Future architects will align buildings to harness its practical energy with breathtaking efficiency. We can imagine structures that function like giant sunflowers, with entire facades or roof sections that slowly rotate throughout the day to maximize solar energy capture. This isn't just about placing solar panels on a roof. It's about designing the entire building as a single, integrated energy harvesting organism. Furthermore, this alignment could extend to passive climate control. The precise angle of a window, the depth of an overhang calculated with advanced software, could be optimized to allow for passive solar heating in the winter while providing shade in the summer, drastically reducing the need for mechanical systems. The building itself, through its intelligent orientation and form, becomes a guardian of resources, protecting the planet by minimizing its own energy footprint while creating a more comfortable, naturally regulated interior environment. The ultimate synthesis of these ideas might be the concept of the breathing building. Picture a structure clad in a bioreactive skin, perhaps made of algae-filled panels. During the day, these panels absorb sunlight, converting carbon dioxide into oxygen, and even producing biomass that can be harvested for energy. At night, they might emit a soft, bioluminescent glow, reducing the need for electric lighting. The building's internal layout could be dynamically reconfigurable, with spaces that expand, contract, or change function based on the time of day or the needs of the community, much like a living organism adapts to its environment. In this scenario, the sacred principles are fully realized. There is deep harmony with natural systems, a profound intentionality in every design decision aimed at fostering life, and a multi-layered form of protection that safeguards health, conserves resources, and nurtures the human spirit. This is not a retreat into a mythical past, but an evolution. It's an attempt to build a world where our environments are not just shelters, but active partners in our well-being, creating new kinds of sacred spaces, not for gods of stone and myth, but for the human spirit in an age of ecological and technological transformation. Our journey through the secret architecture of sacred beasts reveals a truth far more profound than simple monument building. These temples were not passive backdrops for prayer. They were dynamic spiritual technologies, meticulously engineered to act as conduits between the human and the divine. Think of them as sophisticated machines, but instead of gears and circuits, they were built with celestial alignments, resonant chambers, and the symbolic power of mythical guardians. The ancient builders viewed the cosmos as a living, interconnected system, and their architecture was a conscious effort to plug into its energy grid, to harness the stable power of the earth and the cyclical power of the heavens for a sacred purpose. This universal endeavor, from the solar-charged Sphinx to the acoustically tuned hypogee of Malta, shows us a humanity deeply engaged in a conversation with the invisible. They were not content to simply believe in unseen forces. They sought to interact with them, to build physical interfaces where those forces could be channeled, focused, and invited to take up residence. The guardian statues were the conscious heart of this system, not as distant idols, but as active participants, protectors of the delicate balance between order and chaos, and guides for the human soul navigating the mysteries of life and death. This was a world view where every stone, every angle, and every echo was part of a coherent, intentional language. This legacy poses a powerful challenge to our modern, often disenchanted, perspective on the built environment. In an age where architecture is frequently reduced to cost per square foot and maximum efficiency, these ancient wonders ask us a provocative question: can a building have a soul? They remind us that the spaces we inhabit are not neutral containers. They shape our emotions, influence our thoughts, and either dampen or elevate our spirits. The relentless logic of the glass and steel box has its place, but the whispering guardians of stone urge us to remember that we also need spaces that speak to something deeper within us, spaces that inspire awe, foster contemplation, and connect us to a sense of wonder that transcends our daily routines. So what stories will our own buildings tell future generations? Will they speak only of our technological prowess and economic priorities? Or will they also whisper of our values, our dreams, and our relationship with the planet? The call is not to literally carve griffins and dragons onto our skyscrapers, but to recapture the underlying intentionality. It's about designing with a sense of place, with respect for natural light and acoustics, with materials that feel alive and connected to the earth, and with forms that uplift the human spirit. It's about creating hospitals that actively promote healing through their design, schools that stimulate curiosity, and homes that feel like true sanctuaries. The future of sacred space may not lie in the past, but its principles, harmony, intention, and a reverence for the life that inhabits a structure are more relevant than ever. The conversation doesn't end here. I'm incredibly curious about the places that have stirred a similar sense of awe in you. Was it the overwhelming scale of a Gothic cathedral, the serene silence of a forest shrine, or perhaps the mysterious weight of a prehistoric stone circle? Share your experience in the comments below. Describe the sacred space you visited and the unique feeling it evoked. Let's continue to explore this mystery together and keep the dialogue between past and present alive. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of stone.